Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
We have all heard the cliches. Good things happen to those who do good things. Play it forward. Bread cast upon the waters comes back tenfold. God does not always pay on Sundays, etc. Bullshit. Life is more like no good deed goes unpunished. Of course, that was not my thought when a grungy biker-looking guy approached me late one night as I was putting the nozzle away from a well-worn pickup truck after filling up with gas. "Hey buddy, can you help a scrambler out?" he asked, looking around. Now I can see why this guy thought I was biker. I had a skull and crossbones bandana wrapped around my head, which supported mirrored sunglasses. A scraggy beard matched the dark splotches on my oil-splattered torn jeans. Add in my 6'4" frame's not so insignificant belly, which a leather vest and dirty Harley-Davidson t-shirt did not do a good job of hiding, and I looked like the stereotypical biker. However, looks can be deceiving, as I was a complete poser. Not only could I barely ride a tricycle, I had trouble with any car not equipped with an automatic transmission. I was at this gas station only to fill up my dad's truck after returning from a costume party at his house. But what the hell? My wife was staying overnight at my dad's cleaning up, with the kids. Why not live out my fantasy a little longer? "What you need, pal?" I said, as I put away a massive billfold, complete with chain I had purchased last week at a flea market. The biker looked around nervously before speaking. I must have been doing a ton when I and the cruiser ate some pavement back there. He pointed out to the darkness beyond the gas station. Jammed the fork in a damn pothole and got me some road rash doing an OTB. Took me forever to hoof it here. This guy was quite the chatterbox, but I had no idea what he was saying, so I kept quiet. "I need your chase here." He pounded on the side of my truck to scoop up my ride and ferry me back to the house. The biker pulled a wad of cash out of his pocket. "I can get more at the compound from the club if you need." "Put that away," I said, as I waved at the money in Chatterbox's hand. I was having an internal debate. This was a chance to see the inside of a real motorcycle hangout. That beat my day job of moving numbers around on a spreadsheet any day of the week and twice on Sunday. I tried to act calm as I scratched at my beard that took me 2 months to grow for the costume party. "Get in," I grunted to my Chatterbox biker. Chatterbox stopped talking for a second as he smiled and opened the passenger door. The twins rushed into the house the next morning, making me spill my coffee, with only the energy 3-year-old boys can have. Daddy, look what Grandpa gave us." They were still wearing their Batman costumes from the night before, but both wielding plastic baseball bats. My wife trailed in after them. "Boys, go change now, then you can go outside and play." The kids ran to their rooms, whacking each other with the baseball bats as they scurried down the hallway. "How was Dad?" I asked, and as I poured her a cup of coffee, and shrugged as she sat down. "Your dad was happy to see the boys." Dad and had never clicked, although and had a good steady job as an admin assistant. Dad was not overjoyed when I told him I was going to marry Ann. "Randall," Dad had said, "why are you settling for such a plain, dull, boring woman? The only reason I can see and agreeing to marry you is you are the best she can get right now. Dad and loves me, and I love her. We have the same interests, goals, desires, and values. Why do you want to piss on my parade?" Dad just waved his hand. "Blah, you'll both lead dreary, dull lives, until one day one of you will start wanting something better. Damn, son, live a little. Go get drunk, screw some strange, howl at the moon. Otherwise you are going to be saddled with 2.5 kids plus a house with a mortgage, working 9 to 5 as some drone. Do you want your life's highlight to be planning a 2-week vacation to Disney World or the Grand Canyon? That kind of dismal existence is not living, just waiting to die." Dad did not convince me to drop in, and truth be told, we did both work 9 to 5 jobs for the county, and we did look forward to taking the twins to Disney World. I did not think it was boring and seemed to enjoy our life. Of course, we had always lived that way, so how would we know the difference? Ann's words brought me back to the present. "Your dad seemed to enjoy the party. It is the first time since your mom died that he even said something nice to me." I feigned shock, putting my hand over my heart. "Dad gave you a compliment?" And looked shyly over the rim of her coffee cup. "Yup, he liked my Catwoman costume. Said he would love to see me climb a wall." I laughed as and continued. "Your dad wants his truck back right away. You know how he hates it when he has to drive your Prius hybrid." I smirked. Dad never was exactly a father knows best TV show kind of dad. His bedtime stories were along the lines of, "And all the kids cleaned their room, got Dad a beer, and went straight to bed, the E&D." Now it was Ann's turn to laugh as I leaned back in my chair. But then, let me tell you about my little adventure with Dad's truck last night. And sat mesmerized as I retold what happened. When I finished, she could not stop asking questions. Finally, she ran out of queries. Randall, you were really at a motorcycle clubhouse? I am a little angry with you. What if something happened? I have seen Sons of Anarchy on Netflix. I waved my hand at her. It was fine. They kept trying to get me to go to the back room with a girl. I saw his face get red, so I quickly added, of course I didn't. Said I was recovering from a STD. Chatterbox, the guy I helped out last night, kept pushing beers on me. You don't drink. Sure, and Randall the accountant does not drink, but Randall the outlaw biker can handle a beer or two. But look what parting gift my new BFF gave me. And watched as I pulled a little cellophane bag out of my shirt pocket. Randall, what is that? Damn, and I thought you were the TV series Breaking Bad biggest fan. I think it is crystal meth. At least it looks like crystal meth. You are not going to try it, are you? And said, looking toward the hallway where the twins continued whacking each other with the plastic bats. Nah, I'll turn it over to the sheriff on Monday. I scratched my beard. That reminds me, I got to shave this thing. And ran a hand over my face. Why don't you wait on that? The boys are busy. Let's go into the bedroom, and you can show me how an outlaw biker treats his old lady. I turned over the small bag to the sheriff, who was an old friend from high school, along with my biker tale on Monday. On Friday, he called me into his office. I still had my beard, and had really gotten into the whole outlaw biker and old lady role-playing. Who was I to argue? If it got me this much sex, I would be Superman and pretend to fly, even though I can't even swim. The sheriff had another man in his office. The guy had government written all over him. He was DEA and got right to the point. That dope you got is high-quality stuff we think is coming from somewhere north, maybe out of Canada. We have never been able to establish a logistics route. Think you can help us out and make some introductions? I could not help stifle my laugh. You can't be serious. Last weekend was a freak occurrence. Do not let the beard fool you. I move numbers around for a living, not drugs. You must have undercover guys for this kind of stuff. Oh, we do. Real good guys, too. DEA continued. But we need someone to make introductions. As a CI or confidential informant, you can do and say a lot more than a law enforcement officer. We just need a contact. The sheriff broke in. Randall, think of it as an acting role, like the plays in high school. You know, all the world's a stage kind of thing. I had done some walk-on parts in high school, college, and even at the local community theater. There was always a role for the big dumb guy. But this was a whole different ballgame. I looked at both of them in amazement. Sure, all the world's a stage, and everyone is under-rehearsed and unprepared. Somehow I don't think being an elf in the school Christmas pageant is the same as pretending to be a meth-dealing biker. DEA spoke up. Don't worry, we will be behind you all the way. Oh yeah? How far behind me? DEA ignored my comment. You know how to get in touch with the guy? I pointed a finger at my head. I do numbers for a living, remember? I got it right here. 9 months later. The large banquet hall was filled to capacity for the celebration. It was an alphabet of law enforcement agencies, DEA, ATF, FBI, IRS, DHS, even the RCMP, along with the state troopers and a dozen county sheriff's offices. They were all celebrating the end of Operation Great White, which had netted over 100 arrests and rolled up one of the West's biggest transportation, shipping, and distribution meth operations. Me? I was celebrating the end of my not-so-consensual undercover CI role. No matter how many times I tried to get out, I was always being drawn back into the operation. The last 8 months I had been moved to a different location to help with establishments of other agents' cover and my family's safety. I had never been separated from my wife and son so long, and was not happy about it. Now I was sitting at a table, with my wife and father accepting constant congratulations from the fellows around the room. My dad kept telling me how proud he was of me. Of course, he was half-sloshed from the open bar, and was also looking pretty tipsy after more than a few glasses of champagne. My dad had his arm around my shoulder. Goddamn, Randall, my son. You are a real man after all. I couldn't believe it when that government attorney guy showed up and said the cops needed your help. I tried not to breath in my dad's booze breath. Thanks, Dad. I appreciate you looking after and the boys for me. I know it must have been difficult. Dad grabbed, and with his other arm, so abruptly she spilled her drink. No worries. He slurred. Me and your bride got along fine. In fact, we missed you. And broke in, moving out of Dad's grasp and giving me a hug. I missed you. The boys missed you. I wish you did not have to have been away so long." Suddenly, a screeching feedback filled the room as a tall, handsome man tried to speak into a podium mic. He was the federal attorney who was given the task of overseeing Operation Great White when its scope became apparent. "Let T-Bone, the next governor, speak," a drunk voice yelled out from the crowd. The tall man at the mic just smiled and waved at the assembled lawmen. I had been filled in by lots of the cops about him. From a wealthy, well-connected political family on the coast, William T. Boone, or T-Bone, had been an undergrad at Stanford, done law school at Harvard, and after a stint in the military, Jack was punching his ticket with the U.S. Attorney's Office to groom him for a future governor race. As T-Bone droned on about what a great day this has for law-abiding citizens, and how much safer the nation was, his pride, etc. I kept looking into Ann's eyes. She winked at me and crept her hand under the table to stroke my groin. My shock must have been evident on my face as Ann smiled and sped up her movements. I glanced at my watch, wondering if we could slip away unnoticed. We were unable to slip away, and had to wait until the end of the entire event. Fortunately, a Nicetown car had been provided for us. Dad was well-oiled, repeating himself to the driver about his big, bad undercover son, and was beyond tipsy and never took her eyes off me, holding onto my hand in a death grip. I was feeling no pain either, and wished the driver would hurry to my home. I do not recall how I ended up in the living room alone, but remember my youngest boy shaking me awake. "Whoa, son, what are you doing up so late?" I asked in a stupor, taking him into my arms. "GBA and Mom are making lots of noise in the room and woke me up." The boys each had their own rooms, but had moved in together so my dad could take one of their rooms and stay with, and when I got moved to the undercover house, I carried my groggy son, stumbling up the stairs and putting him in bed. I then staggered to the room my dad was staying in and opened the door. At first, my brain refused to register the image sent from my pupils. I rubbed my eyes thinking it was a side effect of the booze I had consumed earlier. The curtain in the window was open. It was a full moon. The light was so bright you could have read a newspaper by it. However, now the moonlight was illuminating my naked wife and astride my equally naked father, doing her best cowgirl riding a bronco impression. I had the strangest thought that they had not even turned down the covers, as the bedspread Disney cartoon characters seemed to animate and mock me while Ann and my father thrust together. I shook my head violently, then bit the inside of my cheek. The sharp pain in my mouth told me I was awake. I do not know how long I stood frozen in place, but the changing pitch of Ann's moaning snapped me out of my stupor, as I knew that sound signaled the start of her orgasm. I reached out and yanked Ann off my father, throwing her to the floor. Dad must have been on the verge also, as his semen spurted all over the main Disney character from Aladdin. I picked up my son's small, colored Playskool desk and slammed the lightweight plastic furniture onto the form in the bed as my wife scrambled on her hands and knees to the wall. Slamming the door behind me, I strode to the hall closet and pulled down the top shelf, scattering everything, until I found what I was looking for. The bedroom door opened, and my wife and dad peeked out. A Lion King sheet they were holding partially hid their nakedness. Both slammed the door closed when I spun around, pointing my grandfather's Korean War-era Colt Model M1911A.45 pistol at them. In 2 steps I reached the bedroom door, and in 1 move kicked it open. And my dad were cowering against the far wall. "Randall, wait," and pleaded. "Son, you don't understand." My dad started, his forehead bleeding from the encounter with the Playskool desk. I racked the slide on the .45 pistol and pointed it at my dad. I heard a noise and looked down to see him pissing on himself. "No, Randall." "No," screamed Ann. I whipped the gun in her direction, then in my father's direction, back and forth, my mind a fog. I started to squeeze the trigger, but at the last second jerked the gun upward and a shot fired into the ceiling. No one moved as the gunshot echo faded, then a small voice stopped me cold. "Daddy, I can't sleep." Turning around, I saw my son was standing in the doorway, clutching his teddy bear. Everything froze in time, but the fog in my mind cleared. I motioned with the gun barrel at my dad and wife. "Get out," I rasped. "Take the boys, leave the house," and scrambled past me, gathering up my son as she left the room. My dad was siding around the edge of the wall toward the door. "Son, I know this." He started before I backhanded him, the pistol barrel striking him in the face, knocking him out the door. I sat on the bed and put my head between my knees. It was very awkward at the police station. Yesterday, I was part of the law enforcement fraternity. While not an officer, I had put myself on the line, and many of the real, undercover cops had given what I thought were overblown exaggerations of my exploits to help them in Operation Great White. Also, there was the fact the county lockup was overcrowded with arrests from the raids. I was dead meat if they put me anywhere near the current holding cells. I was placed in a room normally used to hold low-risk juveniles with a bed and even a TV. The next morning, the sheriff brought me a takeout meal and more bad news. Randall, I don't know what to say, so I will give it to you straight. It looks bad. Your wife has obtained a restraining order against you. Somewhat behind the ears, say, who doesn't understand, filed a bunch of charges already. He rubbed his neck. The paperwork seems to have been, misplaced for the time being. I looked at him, but said nothing. Randall, your wife is in my office now. I snorted as he continued. If I let her in here, you promise to behave? I mean, I got to be here, but I will stand over there in the corner and let you two have your say. I took a deep breath. I appreciate all you're doing, but there is not much to say. But I guess I do not have a lot of control now over what you're going to do, right? The sheriff cracked a smile. Well, it is my jail. He walked over and banged on the door twice. We sat in silence for a few minutes until a deputy opened the door and my wife and stepped in. The sheriff stood up, offering in his chair as he moved to the far corner of the room behind her, and looked a mess as she tentatively sat on the offered chair about a yard from me. Randall, I do not know what to say. How about, I have restraining order against you, so even though you have not seen your sons for 8 months, I can't see them anymore because I want to screw your old man. I saw the sheriff's eyes open wide at my statement and then pulled a tissue from her purse. It was not like that, Randall. Your dad is in the hospital, you know. After the event at the house, he had chest pains and they called an ambulance. I do not give a shit where your stupid buddy is at. All I care about is where are my children now. They're at the house. A friend is staying with them. Another one of your relatives? How deliverance of you. Is this some first cousin you are screwing, or an uncle? She is a friend from work, and not related. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't know you swung both ways, but I guess there is a lot I didn't know. Randall, stop this. It is not helping. Oh, I am sorry, and at my first time dealing with incest, not to mention a cheating wife, and having my children kept from me. I'll need your guidance in this area. Your father and I are not blood related. I will get the restraining order dropped. I told the ASA I'll refuse to testify against you about anything. I was scared. You pointed a gun at me. My apologies, and I was unsure of the rules of etiquette when you come across your wife screwing her father-in-law. Randall, you must let me explain. I know you have it in you to forgive me. I swear to God nothing like this will ever happen again. Now I was starting to get pissed. And even the devil believes in God. Why should I want to forgive you or believe you? Because we belong together. You can search the far corners of the globe and never find a mate like me. Well, thank God the world is round, so your inbred ass can stay in some skanky dark corner where you belong. What else you got? I can't imagine how upset you were, Randall, so I will give you some time to digest all this. But please understand it was never planned. I just missed you so much. I was so lonely, and your dad suddenly became nice to me. It was like he was a different person when he found out you were working undercover. He was busting his buttons trying to keep the secret. She wiped her eyes. We would sit around the table after the twins had gone to bed a lot of evenings. He had his beer and me with a few glasses of wine. Please do not go with the booze made me do it. I won't insult you by saying that. It is just your dad. He is not my dad anymore. And looked at me shocked before continuing. Well, he started talking about your mom and the good times they had. This made me miss you even more. One night we were trading funny, blue stories like the time the kids almost caught us having sex in the shower. He told some torrid stories about your mom back in their younger days. Suddenly he got so sad. And you know how I am after a few glasses of wine next thing you know. I held up my hand to stop her. Sheriff, I said, looking at him. Can I borrow 2 of your pens, please? The sheriff looked at me suspiciously. Why do you want 2 of my pens? So, I can poke my eardrums out before this, which starts giving me details about screwing my mom's husband. And his face got beet red. I was not going to go into details, Randall. I just wanted to say how it started and how aghast I was in the morning, give you some context. Great, I said, throwing my hands up. Screw him once, screw him every day. What's the difference, right? Now and started to get upset. It was not like that. I stayed away from him, even considered asking him to move back to his house. But that would have just hurt the twins. They were already acting out because you were gone. Then 2 weeks later, I was having a real shitty day. I had not heard from you in a week. I was depressed, work was terrible, and the twins were acting their age. Everything was just a mess. I broke down crying that evening and you're duh. He was just so understanding. It wasn't for the sex, it was for the I don't know, comfort. I couldn't sit still any longer and popped up. The sheriff took a step, but I did not move toward and comfort? You were screwing him for comfort? What? And there was no cookie dough ice cream in the house. I sat back down. And the night of my triumphant return? Was that the final big bang? One more screw for old time's sake. And at least looked embarrassed. That was a mistake. She saw my face and backtracked. They were all mistakes, but that last one was the most stupid. I was so happy and horny you were back. Plus I really had a lot to drink. You're duh. He talked me into it one last time. Just for closure, he said. He would not let me leave the room. Kept pestering me. You were passed out on the sofa downstairs. My booze mind told me one more time would not matter. So for the first time in 8 months I was going to get to make love to my wife, but you were going to give me his sloppy seconds? God, I think I am going to hurl. Tears started to form in Anne's eyes. I swear that is not what I was thinking. I was not even thinking that far ahead. At most I thought you were out for the count and I could bathe later. Be all fresh and ready for you in the morning. We would make a whole day catching up. I took a deep breath. And you do know this means divorce. I cannot live with what you did to me. I know it is going to be tough on the kids, but I cannot live with you after that. I may not be some He-Man Rambo, but I do have some self-respect. She turned toward me. Randall, do you just want me to just crawl into a hole someplace? Is that it? Go away and suffer a slow and painful death. No, Anne. I replied. I do not wish you a slow and painful death, something quick, perhaps like an airplane crash. There was shock in her face. I already have a suit picked out for your funeral. However, if you want me to speak at the burial, don't expect any kind words at your parting. This time Anne jumped up and ran to the exit. The sheriff pounded twice and she escaped when the deputy opened the door. I was held for another day, as no one knew what to do with me. I alternated between depression and resignation. A steady stream of cops, both undercover and otherwise I had worked with, stopped in to commiserate. Most all had been divorced at least once. I guess it goes with the territory. Few had kind words about their ex-wives, and I heard plenty of horror stories about divorce court. I guess their advice can best be summed up as bitches be crazy. On the third day, I was escorted by 2 men who had government written all over them to a huge suite in the downtown hotel. I was surprised to see in the middle of the suite, taking on a cell phone in front of window overlooking the city T-Bone, the federal district attorney that was oversaw Operation Great White, and was overseeing the federal court case against a lot of the major players. He waved me to a plush chair, where a silver coffee service was laid out. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when T-Bone ended his call and took a seat across from me. What the hell is this Jerry Springer shit you got going on? I did not need this kind of sideshow screwing up the biggest case in my career. T-Bone may be a federal attorney, but I was past caring. What was he going to do? Throw me in jail? Take my kids away from me? Gee, T-Bone, I am sorry my wife having an affair and screwing my own father is interfering with your political career. I will ask the 304 to take more care with her partners in the future so as to not inconvenience you. T-Bone got a shocked look on his face, then broke into a laugh. You do got a big set of balls on you, don't you? He picked up a coffee cup. But I should have known that after reading the reports of some of the stuff you pulled during this operation. I kept drinking my coffee. We need this to go away, Randall. I leaned pretty heavy on the state attorney to withhold the charges that Dipwad's office had pending. That office has a major federal grant in the pipe, and he does not want me holding it up. There is a lot of heavy lifting coming up, and I need you as one of my star witnesses to have his head in the game. What do I need to do to make you happy? Easy. First, I want to see my kids, like yesterday. T-Bone nodded as he tapped something on a PC table. And get me a divorce from that inborn slut of a wife. Whoa, Randall. You sure you want to get rid of the women over a little bedroom antics? I looked at him like he was crazy. T-Bone, that women, and screwed my own father in my son's bedroom. T-Bone just shrugged. So? My dad has a string of mistresses around the world. My mom is screwing every pool boy and tennis pro of legal age. They are going to be married 30 years next June. The important thing is they are there for each other when it is needed. Marriage is all about appearances and what your spouse can do for you. It's not the Middle Ages. You don't own each other's bodies. I shook my head. Maybe in your crowd, but I take forsaking all others seriously. T-Bone leaned back. What about till death do us part? Or for better or worse, you recall those portions of your marriage contract? I put down my cup. Well, I don't want you to kill her. T-Bone slapped me on the shoulder and laughed. You would have made a good lawyer, always looking for the loopholes. Let me set up a meeting and see what I can do. T-Bone was true to his word about getting me to see my kids, even if and was not, as the restraining order was still in place. However, having U.S. federal marshals pick up and watch over the children while they were visiting me reinforced her objections of the danger I would pose. I was still barred from my house, but T-Bone took care of that too. Randall, this 3-bedroom suite is all yours. Order anything you want from clothes to a bunch of call girls. As we like to say in government service, nothing is too good when it's someone else's money. I looked around the huge suite. Thanks T-Bone, but I do not need 3 bedrooms. T-Bone waved his hand. Well, 2 of the bedrooms are for the U.S. Marshals keeping you company. You pissed off some mighty violent people. I need to keep you safe. This would not have anything to do with keeping me away from and out of jail, would it? T-Bone gave me what looked like a campaign smile. Now you see the big picture, you understand. We aren't dealing with the Planet of Apes here. Just let me try to take care of it, okay? A week later, we were seated in a massive conference room at some law office T-Bone was pals with, and tried to sit next to me, but I got up and moved to the other side of the table. T-Bone looked irritated at my maneuver. Okay, can we stop the musical chairs now? T-Bone said, clapping his hands. The purpose of this little get-together is how do we make all parties involved whole? And spoke up. I never wanted any of this. I just want Randall to come home and forget everything so we can start over, pretend it never happened. Randall, T-Bone said, and all eyes turned to me. Not going to happen. That is like saying if dinosaurs had spaceships they would still be around today. And looked at me. Don't start. There is hope for us still. Hope is a sign of foolishness. My life is over here. I cannot stay in this town any longer. I have to quit my job, move, start over. T-Bone tapped the table. Well, good. Finally some place I can help you both out here. Randall, and I can have you placed in WITSEC, the Witness Security Program run by the U.S. Marshals, more commonly known as the Witness Protection Program. You both get new identities, jobs, a complete clean slate. Like one big do-over. And was having none of that. I am not uprooting my whole family. I have lived in this place my entire life. All my friends are here, my hairdresser, my OBGYN. I just can't pack up and start over. T-Bone did his best and tried to allay his fears. I assure you there are many fine stylists and competent medical professionals in other parts of the county. The U.S. Marshals have a great program to get you set up, complete with everything from dentist to daycare. Everything will be okay in the end. And what if it's not okay? And said, crossing her arms. T-Bone shrugged. Then it is not the end yet. T-Bone's cell phone rang. He looked at the number and scowled. Excuse me, I need to take this. And he walked to a corner of the room turning his back. And looked at me. Randall, we need to end this charade. I admit I screwed up big time. But you need to take some responsibility too. If you had been thinking of your family and not gone off playing Sir Pico, we would never be in this mess. And held up her hand when I tried to speak. And yes, Randall, I accept a major part of the fault for what happened. But look at you, all you can think of is yourself. The hospital called, your dad is asking for you. Have you even seen him? Yes, and I see you and him screwing in my son's room on the Aladdin bedspread every time I close my eyes. I may never watch another Disney cartoon ever again. And gritted her teeth. I know I made a mistake, but I am only human. I have given you time to get over it. Now it is time to pull up your big boy pants and let us get on with our life. So that's your solution? You pulled down your big girl pants to screw your kid's grandfather, and I need to get over it? I didn't say it would be easy. Go do what you have to do to make it right in your mind. Go screw a bunch of women if you think it would make us even. So I can give your sister a call? Anne's face registered shock. You wouldn't. I knew I had gotten to her now. Anne's sister was the complete opposite of Anne. A tall, sexy, curvy babe and a megawatt smile with an outgoing personality to match that had guys buzzing around her since puberty. The family joke was Anne had got the brains and her sister the beauty, and was extremely insecure when it came to her sister. Sure, Anne, why not? She always liked me. That was kinda true. In reality, Anne's sister liked all guys and was always up for a good time. My sister is off limits. And stuttered. What? You want me to screw your mother? You're sick. She is old enough to be your mother. Really? You banged a guy, many times I may add, that was old enough to be your kid's grandfather. It was not that often, Randall. Don't make it more than it was. And the only place screwing your relatives' kind of behavior is normal is on the Jerry Springer show. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? I want to divorce your inbred, white trash, trailer park, hillbilly, 304 bum. God damn it, Randall. I am the mother of your children, not any of those things. Really? What do you call it when someone screws their relatives? A mistake. A single stupid error in judgment, never to be repeated. I am not going to wait forever, Randall, and I am not going to pay for it for the rest of my life because your ego can't take a little hit. You divorce me, and I will do everything in my power to keep your kids from you. I don't care who your big shot friends are. She pointed at T-Bone talking in the corner. It will be like sandpaper. I will use every means to wear you down. Just then T-Bone ended his phone call and walked back to the table. Flashing his vote-getting smile, he asked, "Okay, now where were we?" The next few months had me wishing for my boring life back. The days were filled with depositions with the armies of law firms the defendants from Operation Great White had snagged. The evenings were debriefings and going over reams of reports and transcripts from Operation Great White. I felt like the Great White dope forever getting involved in the whole mess. The only bright spot was getting to see my boys. They were always thrilled to be with me. T-Bone spared none of the taxpayers' expense to make sure the twins and I had a good time together. However, in the divorce proceedings, T-Bone's influence ran out. "Sorry, Randall," T-Bone said. "The judge assigned to your case is a cranky old bastard a year from mandatory retirement. Plus, the old goat has a hard-on for the federal government. So if I try some backdoor stuff, it may do you more harm than good." He tried to cheer me up. "I got 2 guys trailing your wife in. She refused federal protection, but that does not mean we cannot keep an eye on her for the sake of your children's safety. Naturally, any bad behavior they observe can be used in a court of law. You get anything?" T-Bone signed. "No, not really. Your wife and is drinking a bit more than usual, and I had your sheriff set up a random traffic stop on her route home from work. She was within the legal limit, but just barely. I was thinking about the whole mess I was in. It is just so unfair," I said. T-Bone thought I was talking about his tactics. "Randall, any time you find yourself in a fair fight, you have planned very poorly." Early one Sunday morning, 2 federal marshals rushed into my room and roused me out bed. "Hurry. Get up. We gotta go now." I am not a morning person, so everything was a blur to me. When I woke up fully, I found myself in the basement of the courthouse. The room was filled with a dozen people, marshals, sheriffs, feds, but everyone seemed to defer to an older gentleman sitting at some type of table with a secretary next to him. I was stunned when a door opened and T-Bone, followed by my wife, and who appeared to be hungover, were escorted into the room, and looked bewildered, as was I, when she was placed in a chair. There was a hush in the room as T-Bone approached the older man at the desk. The U.S. Marshal next to me whispered, "That's the federal magistrate for this district." T-Bone started speaking in a clear voice. "Your Honor, we have requested this emergency hearing to have an immediate order of protection placed for the wards of one of my witnesses in an ongoing federal case." T-Bone pivoted and pointed at, and "I request that we have that woman's children removed from her domicile immediately, as she has placed these minors, the federal government's key witness children, in grave danger and harm's way," and jumped out of her chair. "I have never done anything to hurt my babies, and I never will." One of the U.S. Marshal put her hand on his shoulder and forced her back into the chair. T-Bone continued as if and had never spoken. "We are dealing with some violent elements in this case, and I was fearful of witness tampering and outside forces trying to coerce our case. The lady there," he pointed at, and refused offered protection, but I had resources assigned to her discreetly for her own safety. T-Bone then passed some papers to federal magistrate. I also had one of the legal owners of the house give permission to install surveillance inside the domicile for security, an astute precaution as it turned out. T-Bone nodded at a man who started a video being displayed on a 70-inch screen. The video showed the inside of my house. An obviously drunk and staggered in the door with a grungy-looking biker guy. When he turned, I recognized him. It was Chatterbox, the damn guy I had met from the outlaw biker gang that had started this whole mess. T-Bone kept up a running commentary about Chatterbox's criminal history, outstanding wants and warrants, and how he had met and that night and their interaction. I was listening with half an ear as I watched them proceed up the stairs as the video switched to a camera in the bedroom. Mercifully, T-Bone fast-forwarded through Chatterbox and sexual escapades, although watching them go through the motions of screwing at 30x speed did have some comic appeal, especially when and was sucking him, trying to get Chatterbox up for the 3rd time. T-Bone resumed normal speed when it appeared and had fallen asleep, exhausted from her exertions. Chatterbox jumped off the bed and raced down the stairs. He opened the front door and a host of bikers raced in, ransacking the house, opening every drawer and shelf. I rose out of my chair when I saw one of the bikers open my son's bedroom door. The marshal next to me whispered, "Don't worry, we were watching the whole time." There was a heavily armed SRT unit at both doors waiting to burst in if needed. My mind came back to T-Bone speaking as his guests exited the house on the video monitor. "Your Honor, the SRT team was able to apprehend the men you saw in that video. All were armed, and all had a history of violent crime. It is only good fortune that no one was injured," and started crying, sobbing into her hands. T-Bone continued talking. "The children have temporarily been relocated into a safe environment at a federal facility, and I request they be placed with their father, and later in WITSEC for their own protection," and jumped out of her chair, shaking off a marshal's attempt to restrain her. "You cannot take my children, goddamn you." The federal magistrate looked up and was bear-hugged by a man in a sheriff deputy outfit. "Ma'am, from what I have seen on video and read in this report, you willingly invited a known wanted felon into your home. Thus you placed the welfare of the children in jeopardy with utter disregard to the consequences of your actions. I watched him sign some papers. I so order that the minors in question be placed in the male parent's care until such time as the authorities feel they are able to enter WITSEC. Any contact with the mother is prohibited and shall be prohibited until determined by the same governing authorities, keeping the welfare of the minors as priority factor," and was still struggling with the deputy when the federal magistrate stood up. I deemed these proceedings closed and walked out. I was still stunned by this turn of events that when T-Bone came over to me, I could barely speak. "T-Bone, how did you pull that off? It just hit me I would get to be with my kids full time. You are the smartest man on earth." T-Bone shrugged. "Most people don't change. It was a matter of time before she did something stupid." He gave me a lopsided grin. "And for the record, any time you think you are the smartest guy in the room, it's time to find a new room. It like deja vu, the same juvenile room, same bed, same TV in the jail. Except this time I was now sitting on the chair with T-Bone behind me, and N was sitting on the bed. It's not over, Randall." And spat at me. "You are not taking me away from my babies. You still looking to do that sandpaper thing on me? Wear me down." And just stared at me. "The thing is, N, that sandpaper can scratch and rip and irritate. But after all that, the item is nice and polished. The sandpaper is worthless." There was a long silence before and looked down at her hands. I didn't know how it happened. I knew I was drinking too much, but I do not want to blame the booze. I was at the gas station filling up when I came out after paying and my rear tire was flat. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. I just started crying and pushed the hair out of her eyes before speaking again. That biker guy seemed to come out of nowhere. Turns out he is a cousin from my mom's side. I knew him from my aunt's wedding a long time ago. He just pushed my car off to the side and changed the tire. I was so scared, but he just kept talking. The more he talked, the more at ease I felt. When he put his arm around me, I did not stop him. It just felt so nice to finally have someone understand what I was going through. And brought her head up to look at me. He declined the money I offered him, but said he would buy me a drink. Claimed I was in no shape to drive home. Said a drink would calm me down. At first it was fun, sitting in the bar swapping old stories and catching up. Next thing you know, I am being hustled out of my bed and my babies are being taken from me. And looked at T-Bone. My own government is trying to steal my children. What's the difference between you and them? Huh, what is the difference? T-Bone cleared his throat. Those people are greedy men who have no feeling or respect for anyone or anything. They will destroy anything that gets in their way to get what they want. T-Bone took a step forward before continuing. We work for the United States federal government. And took a deep breath. Randall, I swear it is all a big misunderstanding. One giant screw up. She reached out to touch my chest. I need you to think. Listen to your heart. I removed N's hand from my shirt. When I hear you speak in, all I can hear are banjos, and all I can think is paddle faster, get away. I finally got my boring life back. It was a strange road that gave me a new face, along with liposuction that got rid of my belly fat faster than any exercise. In a strange way to save government money, I was thrown together with a Russian mob widow during WITSEC orientation. She had lost both her children in a car bomb attempt and was missing her children badly. As a coincidence, my children were missing a mom. It was a good fit, and somehow, I saw T-Bone's fingerprints all over that one. I now live in a small southern town by the coast near the middle of nowhere with a new name. The boys also got to pick their own names. It took a while to dissuade them that being called Iron Man was not an acceptable moniker. We keep them busy, and they now rarely ask questions about their past. T-Bone did run for governor, but lost in his first attempt. He is now an ambassador to some European country. And in Dad? Marshall's notified me that Dad passed away. Anything left in his will, I had given to charity. Turns out, I was entitled to a portion of the unclaimed and seized funds from Operation Great White, not $1 zillion, but enough for a boring lifestyle. And still lives in the same town. You know how people talk in a small town, so she has not had an easy time of it. I send her pictures of the twins at Christmas through the U.S. Marshal Dead Drop. When they are 18, I will let them decide what they want to do. For now, I just want to enjoy being the dull, boring guy I was meant to be. Right now, we are planning a trip to Disneyland. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Cheating wife left me for a younger man, but my revenge and new love made her regret everything. Arthur, are you listening? You just need to sign the papers, and we're finished. My wife, Annie, whom I've been married to for over 25 years, was speaking to me. I tried to pay attention, but her voice seemed to drift further away as her rant continued. It all began this afternoon when I came home from work. Annie sat at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression. Unfortunately, she only had one glass, neglecting to consider if I might want one too, especially given the direction our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble brewing as I sat down. Without asking about my day, Annie plunged into the news that she was leaving me. She claimed to have found her soulmate, someone who made her happier than I ever did, rendering me no longer adequate. Despite her escalating volume, her words became increasingly distant to me. Our story followed a familiar pattern. We met in high school, stayed together, and welcomed our daughter Sally shortly after getting married. While she wasn't the primary reason we tied the knot, she was always part of the plan. Presently, we both held steady jobs, lived comfortably, and had managed to pay off our house with some savings to boot. We frequently professed our love, took family vacations, and though our physical closeness had waned over time, we still found moments of intimacy. I believed our love ran deep, and we were destined to grow old together, until this afternoon. Annie's rant continued, her face reddening with each passing moment. Arthur, look at me. It became increasingly difficult to focus, but I turned towards her. You need to sign these papers, she pointed adamantly at the documents before me. Her tone was demanding, yet I struggled to maintain concentration. It felt as though the room's brightness and color were fading, despite the kitchen lights being on. Internally, I was fraught with emotion, but externally, my body remained unresponsive. The longer I stayed silent, the angrier Annie grew. The last thing I remember is her slap. Though I couldn't feel the impact, I imagined it leaving a prominent red mark. But still, I couldn't move, and the world seemed to darken around me. It had been a long day. The drive home from university was delayed due to an accident slowing everyone down. When I arrived home, there was an eerie quietness in the house. The lights were on, Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's was nowhere to be seen. Upon entering the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on the ground. Dad sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. On the table lay an open bottle of Mom's wine and a mostly empty glass. In front of Dad were papers with numerous "Sign Here" tabs. Approaching Dad, I touched his shoulder from behind. Hey, Dad, I anticipated a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was taken aback. His eyes appeared glazed, almost milky white, with traces of tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, threatening to drip into his lap. Panicked, I called out, Dad, Dad, come back to me, Dad! Tears welled in my eyes. With no response from Dad, I tried to calm myself. Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help, I whispered to myself. Retrieving my phone, I dialed emergency. I explained that my father, Arthur, was unresponsive. After providing my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival time. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand, offering reassurance. This man had been my everything growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events, musicals, and ballet. He endured my early attempts at the violin, encouraging me every step of the way. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a harder-to-find violin, not the best, but it held sentimental value as it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at university, with a focus on strings and violin, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions raced through my mind. Why was Dad like this? What had happened? And where was Mom? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I began reading, my skin crawling at the revelation that Mom wanted to divorce Dad for reasons unknown to me. It appeared highly likely that Dad's condition stemmed from the documents, especially considering Mom's open wine bottle, indicating she had given Dad the papers and left. People often speculate on the rapid fluctuation of emotions. I suppose they've never experienced such a betrayal. For me, any compassion and desire to be in my mother's presence faded away shortly after the ambulance arrived. I directed them in getting Dad onto a gurney and off to the hospital. After locking up the house, I followed behind, making calls as I drove. I contacted my grandmother Dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend, and then his manager at work, informing them of Dad's situation and his impending absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone requested updates on his condition, and his manager assured me of arranging emergency leave and informing their boss. I knew I was putting off the next call, consumed with anger, but I felt compelled to call Mom. The phone rang, and she answered after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my darling. How was your day?" I was taken aback by her casual tone. Surely she couldn't be so naive as to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Dad, and Mom was well aware of my routine. "Where are you, Mom?" "I'm out and about, sweetie," she trailed off, sensing my inquiry. "So in other words, you've just shattered my father, your husband, and left him without a second thought." "Oh no, darling. I tried to explain to your father about Paul and the situation, but he wasn't responsive, so I thought it best to leave and let him process that we won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Dad's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left it shattered before him. "It appears to me like you abandoned him when he needed help. Are you truly that heartless? Do you even understand what's happening now, or do you simply not care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Sweetie, don't get angry now. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine and some support while Paul and I wait to marry." Yep, my mother was firmly in la-la land. "Angry? You haven't seen angry yet, Mother. And just so you know, I'm currently following Dad to the hospital. He's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my sweetie, I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No excuses, Mother. Let me ask you, is this Paul you're running off with the same Paul from your work that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Of course, darling, Paul. The man from my mother's workplace. She never stopped mentioning him. So, let me get this straight. He's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with him for how long again?" She hesitated. 6 months, right? So, for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your workplace behind Dad's back. You've been lying to Dad and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly neither did Dad, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react? Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Paul, you'll see we're meant to be together. We? She had just referred to we for the second time. Did she expect me to abandon Dad to move in with her and her boyfriend? I could feel my anger boiling over. I knew I would say something regrettable if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I say something I might regret, but let me be crystal clear. I will not be leaving Dad, and there's no way I'm going anywhere near Paul, let alone moving into the place you and he are cavorting in. "Sally," my mother responded sharply, "I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking." I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I would condone what she was doing, she had another thing coming. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Dad's phone, which was silly because, if he could, I doubted he would pick up a call from her. Since I had Dad's phone with me, I ignored any calls from her. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Dad, and he was in a ward under observation. Aunt Rhonda had arrived and informed me that she had also received several calls from my mother but wasn't sure what was happening other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Rhonda turned a deep shade of scarlet, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" "Sure, Aunt Rhonda. Here you go." Aside from being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family attorney. For the next hour, we sat beside Dad as Rhonda read through the documents, occasionally muttering under her breath. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room periodically, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to get her divorce from your father. The schedule outlined here shows that this process has been in motion for over 2 months and had to be served this week, or it would have incurred significantly higher fees from her legal team." I shrugged. I had heard enough justification from my mother. I was determined to ensure that she and Dad separated for what she had done. It was strange. I was never particularly close to my father, always looking up to my mom, but her actions seemed plain foolish. This whole mess seemed to be orchestrated by Paul, her so-called soulmate. Regardless, Mom and Dad weren't going to weather this storm, especially if Dad's current condition was any indication. The good news is that she hired a shire of a lawyer to represent her. She's going to have to shell out a hefty sum just for the divorce and even more if it goes to court, Rhonda grinned. Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's getting the family discount. We shared a smile for the first time that evening. Additionally, some of the claims here, like wanting 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child maintenance, are likely quite exaggerated. I assume from your reaction that you're not planning to live with your mother? I shook my head in confirmation. Good, okay. I have some initial thoughts. However, we need to see what happens with your dad over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in hot water for abandonment and mental cruelty. The next few days flew by, with doctors constantly checking on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to continue my university studies in the hospital chair by his bed, laptop, and textbook in hand. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit, I shed a few tears at home, alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Dad's hospital stay was when Tina Williams, the owner of the company where Dad worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Dad's manager, Tom, I had never met Tina herself. Tina was a striking woman, curvaceous without being overweight, with tan skin, dark, raven hair, and mesmerizing blue eyes that could make any person, male or female, swoon. As it turned out, Dad had been part of a group at his workplace that had supported Tina a few years back during her messy divorce. Her unfaithful ex-husband had attempted to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Dad had introduced her to Aunt Rhonda, who had successfully protected Tina's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then 6-year-old daughter. Tina visited Dad several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Dad's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Dad had a knack for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Dad is an accountant by profession, working for one of the financial clearinghouses that assist banks in processing payments to financial institutions. While the work may be tedious, Dad apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Rhonda and Tina in the midst of a conversation. Although it seemed a bit heated, their frustration was aimed at my mother rather than each other. It turned out that my mother had sent a demand letter to Tina, requesting access to all of Dad's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out, Rhonda remarked, sporting an exploitative grin. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Tina. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seems like she and her new partner are in dire financial straits since I've frozen all the joint assets while Arthur is incapacitated. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes, this morning, I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks, a text message asking if I could lend her a few thousand. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. I mean, she hasn't even asked about Dad since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Tina's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping in pitch, indicating her deep disdain for Annie. It was as if I could see sparks flickering around her smoldering eyes. I just hoped she never had to be in the same room with my mother, otherwise I feared she might incinerate her on the spot. Despite my current feelings toward my mother, she was still my mother. She has destroyed the most wonderful man, Sally. If it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarice or my business. So many people in the office helped me during one of the lowest points in my life, but your father took the time to listen to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me. He just let me talk. No one has ever done that without offering an opinion. He introduced me to your aunt here, ensuring I was taken care of. If he were single, I would have pursued him with everything I had after my divorce. I shrugged to let a smile grace my face. He won't be married much longer. Their faces registered realization, and Rhonda giggled while Tina smiled. Thanks, Sally, I needed that. I still can't believe what your mother has done to him, or that she discarded such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do, Tina walked over to my dad, and as Rhonda and I watched, she bent down and gave him a tender but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled. However, her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan. As I gradually woke up, I sensed soft lips on mine, just the right amount of pressure, conveying a gentle and tender affection I hadn't felt in a long time. The hospital room's beeping and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Anticipating Annie's presence as I opened my eyes after that affectionate kiss, I was surprised to find Tina standing there with a smile on her face. Tina, approaching from the other side of the bed, Sally and Rhonda joined us. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to be okay," Sally said. As my memories caught up with me, I realized Annie was leaving me, or had already left. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Sally had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers, revealing Annie's months-long infidelity. I learned how Annie had threatened Tina once Rhonda froze our finances until they could determine my condition. "How long? 2 weeks?" Arthur asked. 2 weeks, Rhonda replied. I turned to Tina. You kissed me?" Tina blushed. "Yeah, sorry, I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye." I smiled. "No, it's okay. I guess I'm on the market, so I think it's okay." Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting physical checkups, blood tests, and more. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed, along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he probed into my experiences, I recounted finding Annie alone, drinking, and her announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose color, and sensory input became disjointed, making it difficult to move. Despite growing upset, my last memory was of Annie slapping and yelling at me, her words incomprehensible. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of Annie's aggression while I was unable to respond. "Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive?" "I'd say it was around 5:30, baby." "Or why?" "Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time." The psychologist interjected. "It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience misuse while unresponsive. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. Although this is a much more extreme case than usual, it does make sense." Rhonda added, "When Arthur was young, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite a bit, and one day a neighborhood parent found Arthur lying on the ground in a local park. Our parents put him to bed and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought as he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me in the park. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they spoke to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. "I believe we may have a precedent here," the psychologist mentioned. "In many ways, the mind remains poorly understood. However, if something similar has occurred before, it's plausible it could happen again." I frowned. He reassured, "I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these three lovely ladies, even if something were to happen again, I believe you will be well taken care of." We conversed for a few more minutes before he excused himself. I also found myself fatigued, which might seem odd for someone who had just slept for the past 2 weeks, but I was. So I sent all 3 girls home to rest and informed them they could visit me tomorrow to ensure I was all right. Over the next 2 days, I eased back into life. Tina brought me a work laptop and a few simple tasks to complete, with instructions to only do them if I felt bored. Rhonda visited primarily to review her revised divorce documents and to have me sign some papers so she could proceed with ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill conducted an hour-long interview with me regarding my experience that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't certain if we were planning to file a complaint against Annie eventually. However, Rhonda instructed me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and departed. On the second afternoon, after waking up from what Sally dubbed my checkout, I was discharged to return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised to find Tina waiting at the door. She assisted Sally in guiding me to her large suburban SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We opted for takeout and she pitched in to clean up before, staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Sally hugged her and made sure I walked her to her car. "Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you. Well, in a few weeks, when you're feeling back on your game, you can take me out for dinner and dancing." I blushed. Here I was, just an afternoon out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had awakened me was asking me out. But she was attractive, and according to Annie, I was to be a single man again. "Okay, next Friday night after work." That gives me almost 2 weeks to get myself back to normal. She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a little longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, I found it amusing that, for a moment, I wondered about the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina hovered around me, ensuring I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Rhonda brought me that Friday afternoon caught all of us a little off guard. "This afternoon, Annie got arrested," she announced. "What happened?" I inquired. "Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for Annie on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally disabled and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles," she explained. "What does this mean for the divorce?" Tina, who had joined us again for dinner, asked that evening. She had her 8-year-old daughter, Clarice, with her, who was watching a Disney movie in the lounge room while we conversed. First, with Monday marking my return to work, Tina would see me then. However, I was starting to grasp that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Tina and picturing her, contemplating what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited, I thought. Rhonda grinned. "It's likely going to tilt a few things in Arthur's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50th split of the bank accounts in the house. I know we could aim for more, given the circumstances, but reckon Arthur would want to be fair." I nodded. "Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she tried to extract from you," Tina continued. "I filed a case against her for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent her from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. She'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Arthur's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Arthur doesn't lose anything he shouldn't," she said, smiling. "So, how long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda?" Sally inquired. "Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. After that, if Annie decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her," Rhonda explained. That evening, as I escorted Tina to her car, Sally assisted Clarice into the back seat of the large Suburban. Tina embraced me once again and surprised me with a quick kiss, reminiscent of the other day. "Arthur, I know you're married, and you're a man of honor, so I won't rush things. But I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I've wanted you for a long time, of course, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble," Tina expressed sincerely. For a moment, I gazed into her deep blue eyes, brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face, and then leaned in to kiss her. Instead of a tender kiss, it became one filled with passion, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. I sensed the mutual connection between us. When I pulled back, Tina's eyes were closed, and she ran her tongue over her lips, savoring our kiss. I grinned. "Consider that my acknowledgement of your claim." We glanced at the girls, both of them giggling at our kiss. Clarice was clapping, and Sally sported a huge grin. As Tina and Clarice drove off, Sally hugged me, and we waved goodbye. The following months were quite a ride. On one hand, Annie wanted a speedy divorce, but on the other, she wasn't content with the settlement. It seemed Paul was calling the shots, convincing her she deserved the lion's share of the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down, she must have realized it after so many years of marriage. As her settlement demands grew more absurd, Rhonda had a single conversation with Annie's lawyer, and whatever was said put an end to all objections overnight. Tina and I went on dates every Friday night while Sally began babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time for dinner, coffee, and entertainment. Though we never went beyond holding hands and kissing, I had a feeling the night my divorce finalized would be unforgettable. Back at work, now things were going smoothly. While we were a successful financial organization, we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, were well compensated, and enjoyed each other's company. I think the staff caught on to Tina and me becoming an item at some point. Although everyone was happy for us, I had to dial back my usual antics. My direct manager, who reported to Tina, made sure to remind me of appropriate workplace behavior, considering I was essentially dating his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized 1 week from the upcoming Thursday. There were no court proceedings, however. Annie had requested a meeting to discuss matters before the final decree. I agreed to meet the day before, and we arranged for her to visit the house to speak with both Sally and me. I had taken the afternoon off from work, and prepared lamb chops and gnocchi in a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal for all of us, and I hoped it would help ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation. That evening, Sally arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6, the doorbell rang, signaling Annie's arrival at the front door. I haven't described Annie's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, Annie was an attractive mid-40s housewife. She had cropped, shoulder-length brown hair, a curvy figure typical of a mother, and although carrying a few extra pounds, she was still quite attractive with a well-proportioned 34C bust and an appealing rear. She was an attractive wife. Unfortunately, the woman standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a significant amount of weight, developed jowls under her chin and puffy cheeks. Her stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and her once curvy posterior had expanded. Furthermore, she was dressed in loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. Now, I have nothing against people of larger size, but that wasn't the Annie I knew. I think my surprise at her physical transformation was evident on my face, although Annie made no comment about it, merely grimacing in response. Hello, Annie. Please come in," I greeted. As we entered the kitchen, I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted, and we engaged in small talk for a few minutes. She inquired about work and my well-being while I skipped the inquiry about her health. "It's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we've been working on bulking me up," she addressed the unspoken question. I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this woman. Despite her actions, a lingering concern for her health remained, albeit greatly diminished. "You don't approve, do you?" She looked at me. "No, Annie, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size, but I'll be honest, I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help," I expressed. "But you don't care, do you?" Her expression fell. "You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here." "Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and practically left me for dead." I trailed off, shrugging while she sighed. "I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, didn't I?" "No, Mother," Sally interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. "You did a freaking horrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family, then walked out without a care in the world, and I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight." "Sally, calm down," I intervened. "Your mother knows the situation we're in and how unhappy we all are. She requested this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out." Sally wasn't pleased. As far as I could tell, like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that momentous day. The way my daughter was glaring at her mother, this situation wouldn't end well for anyone. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. Attempting a cheerful tone, I suggested, "Tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner, so let's eat first." I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Sally maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table, and Annie requested to speak to Sally alone. "No way. You can say whatever you want to me with both of us present," Sally retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was evident Sally was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. Annie seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored what her mother had done to me on that fateful night. She acquiesced. Annie took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but she addressed Sally. "Well, Sally, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, and despite everything, I don't want to estrange my daughter forever." Glancing at me, Annie added, "There's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private, without your father present." "Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it," Sally declared. Before Annie could respond, Sally stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut moments later. I hope that would go better," Annie murmured softly, more to herself than to me. "I think considering the circumstances it went rather smoothly," I replied, letting her know I understood. "Really?" Annie sounded surprised. "Yes, really," I sighed, continuing. "Annie, you need to realize that at this moment nobody in this house holds much affection for you." She started to reply, but I raised my hand, signaling her to let me finish and lay everything out. "First, you engage in a long-term carnal affair with someone, then conceal it from both Sally and me. Next, you serve me with divorce papers out of the blue. And when I enter what Sally refers to as checkout mode, you proceed to yell, scream, and then slap me." Annie appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. "Yes, I remember that, and I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandoned me when I was unresponsive, leaving me there until Sally arrived home and discovered me in the same state," I recounted. Annie's expression turned to panic. When Sally calls you, you show no concern for me, despite your daughter being visibly distressed about her father. You never once inquire about my well-being until tonight, make unreasonable demands of my workplace, and upon entering here, it's still all about you. You asked Sally for forgiveness, yet you have not apologized to her at any point. I paused briefly, hoping my words would resonate. Yes, Annie, with all of that considered, I think things went quite well. Annie's gaze shifted to the floor, tears welling in her eyes. They hadn't yet fallen, but they lingered threateningly. I couldn't discern whether they were for Sally, myself, or simply a reflection of her own emotions. Continuing, I stated, "Now, our divorce will be finalized tomorrow, and unless you have anything further to add, I believe we have fulfilled your request for a final meeting." I walked to the door and opened it. Annie glanced at me before exiting. Once outside, she turned to look at me. "Arthur, we did have some good years, didn't we?" "Yes, Annie. Most of our time together was incredible. You were an exceptional lover, a devoted wife, and a loving mother. I'm not sure what this Paul character has done to you, but I don't see the woman I fell in love with in the person standing before me. All I see is someone who seems lost, manipulated into becoming overweight, self-centered, and caring more about what others can provide for you than the people themselves." Once again, she lowered her gaze to her feet. Tears hadn't fallen, but they were close. "You truly mean that, don't you, Arthur?" "Yes, I do," I affirmed. She turned to leave, but hesitated, looking utterly broken this time. "Arthur, about the house. Paul told me I needed to ask." So that was the purpose of her visit. It wasn't about reconnecting with her family. It was solely about money. I chuckled, leaving Annie puzzled by my reaction. "Go tell your soulmate that you'll have your share of the savings and the equity from this house transferred to the bank account your lawyer provided to Rhonda by this time. Tomorrow. And Annie," she glanced at me, "protect that money from Paul, or you won't have it for long." Update the next morning marked the final decree, and Annie and I were officially no longer husband and wife. There was a small twinge of sadness within me, but it was fleeting. Mostly I felt content. The past few months had been challenging for everyone. Now, at 48 years old, I felt liberated, knowing I still had much life left to live. Rhonda phoned to inform me that pizza was on her tonight at my place. During lunch at the office, Sally dropped by. We reminisced about happier times with her mother, when we were a complete family. Despite Sally's dislike for her mother, I could sense she missed the woman she once was. Truthfully, I did too. We shared many good years together. As Sally left, there seemed to be a silent exchange between her and Tina. Not long after, I was summoned to Tina's office. She closed the door and then kissed me passionately, as if the sun might never rise again. I must admit I responded in kind. "Can I claim you as mine now, Arthur?" Tina asked. I felt a sore spot on my neck, likely from a bruise forming where she had just kissed me moments before. "I think you may have already done that." That evening's dinner was delightful, with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarice all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from Annie. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Tina and I consummated our relationship. I must have done something right because, throughout the weekend, Tina seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down. But her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, we tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Sally and Clarice's new little brother. Update: 5 years had passed, and Sally, her boyfriend Tina, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted Annie sitting across the room. She had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from her, and she hadn't attempted to contact Sally. Excusing myself from the table, I approached her. "Hi, Annie." "Hi, Arthur. How are you?" I inquired. She glanced down at her chicken salad, replying, "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me I was his soulmate and you meant nothing to him. But when I did receive the money up front, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me and preferred overweight women. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him, but I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me. Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self," she confessed, holding back tears as she looked at me. After all these years, that look resembled the Annie I once knew. "Arthur, I am so sorry. I treated you horribly. I did it because I believed Paul knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive, and—" She paused, gripping the table's edge. You could have died because of my actions. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize." Tears streamed openly down her face. Surprisingly, Sally had joined us, standing beside me, also witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a weary smile, grabbed my hand, and extended her hand to her mother. Seeing Sally and then witnessing her extending her hand, Annie panicked, attempting to leave, but Sally blocked her path. "Mom, stop. You don't need to leave," Sally asserted, sliding into the booth next to Annie. Sally and I joined her. I glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter conversed. There were many tears shed, but for once, they were healing, not hurtful. Once they caught up, Sally and I reintroduced Annie to everyone else. Annie seemed a bit unsettled when introduced to Keegan as Auntie Annie. Following that day, we gradually welcomed Annie back into our lives. Sally and her mother reconnected slowly, meeting for coffee every week or two. Trust developed gradually between them, but eventually solidified. When Sally got married, Annie had the opportunity to play the role of mother of the bride. Tina occasionally invited Annie over for dinner at our house. Initially, I suspected it was to spite Annie for what she had lost and Tina had gained by marrying me. However, while they never became close friends, Tina and Annie developed an odd sort of friendship that I never quite understood. Rhonda never forgave Annie for the injury she inflicted on me, although she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Tina's approval, Annie and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past spanning over 5 years ago. The counselor speculated that Annie might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but Annie vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate appendage, she remarked with a sweet smile directed at me. Arthur and Sally deserve better from me, she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. It took me 5 years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Arthur has allowed me back into his life. And Tina, too, she blushed, acknowledging Tina's warmth towards her, despite everything. She had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky, losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time. Annie gained more from those counseling sessions than I did. It was reassuring to confirm that neither Sally nor I were responsible for Annie's decision to leave us. And she was right. Tina had lifted us up and forged a stronger family bond. They say people pay for their mistakes eventually, and Paul did. He moved to another state and once again attempted to manipulate a married woman for her money. This time, however, the woman's husband caught Paul in the act and took matters into his own hands, rendering Paul incapable. The husband received a 10-year sentence, but if Rhonda's rumors were accurate, he might be released sooner. Tina and I are still deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone as much or as deeply as I did Annie, but Tina proved me wrong. She not only gave me her love, but also her soul, wholeheartedly. We continue to work together in her company, and I'm still in the same job. While we have our ups and downs, we always prioritize communication when it matters. Her physique remains remarkable, and we still make love frequently. We've even indulged in love-making moments in exotic locations while on vacation. Often, just one glance is enough to lead us to locking the bedroom door and passionately indulging in each other. Once, after we had finished making love, showered, and dressed, we entered the kitchen to find Sally and Annie engaged in conversation. We had recently learned that Sally was expecting, sparking excitement as the girls discussed the arrival of my first grandchild. My goodness, Sally, you'd think these two were teenagers with the way they behave. Tina, you'll have to let me in on your secret to keeping Arthur so lively. Maybe I can get some tips to keep Fred on his toes, Sally teased amidst laughter. I blushed. Annie had been casually dating lately, but nothing serious until Fred entered the picture. Mom, let them be. We all know that Dad has been on a mission since, Sally teased mischievously, her eyes twinkling. Annie hesitated while Sally laughed, and Tina blushed. I simply leaned back, smirked at my girls, and felt myself stirred again by Tina's presence. Eventually, I excused myself, making my way back to the bedroom, with Tina following shortly after, locking the door behind her.
My name is Alex Costa, a 35-year-old with a string of houses in my name in our hometown. This has been achieved through years of hard work, careful investments, and sacrifices along the way. To give some context, I come from a modest family. My parents were both blue-collar workers who labored tirelessly to provide a comfortable life for me and my siblings. They always dreamed of owning their own home, but it was beyond their reach. Their dedication ignited my ambition and fueled my determination to build a better life for myself and my family. During my college years, I met my wife. She shared similar experiences growing up, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. From her upbringing, she learned the significance of financial prudence and resourcefulness. We both wanted to overcome financial struggles and create a stable life for our future children. Together, my wife and I bought and flipped houses over the years, saving every penny and making careful investments. Eventually, we accumulated several properties, each representing years of hard work, countless sacrifices, and a shared dream. Today, I'm a father to 2 wonderful kids, a son and a daughter. Our properties are not just a source of income. They symbolize our dedication to securing a future for our children. Little did I know that my life would soon take an unexpected twist, thanks to an entitled woman named Susan. Susan has been one of my tenants for a few years. She lives in a comfortable 3-bedroom house that I had carefully saved for and purchased years before marrying my wife. The property is in a prime location in the city and is conveniently close to her daughter's high school. Susan, a single mother, had been abandoned by her husband shortly after their daughter was born. Learning of her situation, I offered her a subsidized rent to make it affordable for her and her daughter. Though I knew I would lose out on potential income, I wanted to help them. Over the years, I've never increased the rent, allowing it to remain the same. Susan was a reliable tenant, always paying on time, and we had developed a casual landlord-tenant relationship, occasionally keeping in touch when she needed assistance around the house. Her daughter, Jenna, is a high school senior preparing for college. 3 months ago, Susan proudly informed me that Jenna had been accepted into a prestigious out-of-state university, a remarkable achievement for any student. However, this university was very expensive, and unfortunately, Jenna's scholarship barely covered 10% of her fees. I understood the financial challenges of higher education and wondered how they would manage. One day, Susan requested to meet with me. Assuming it was about some renovations needed around the house, I agreed without hesitation. We sat down in her living room, where she began by expressing her appreciation for my generosity in keeping the rent affordable. She went on to explain that she wanted Jenna to attend her dream university, but, after crunching the numbers, realized the costs, including tuition, housing, and other expenses, were overwhelming. She had even reached out for financial aid, explored scholarships, and taken up a part-time job in addition to her full-time one, yet it still wasn't enough. I nodded sympathetically, expecting that she might ask to delay paying the rent for a month, which would have been understandable. Instead, Susan presented a request that left me dumbfounded. She asked if I could sell the property she was renting. I looked at her, stunned, as she explained that the money from selling this property could help fund her daughter's college education. "Are you serious?" I responded, a mix of astonishment and disbelief in my voice. "You want me to sell my property to pay for your daughter's college tuition?" Susan's eyes pleaded with me as she insisted it was her only hope to secure her daughter's future. She mentioned she had already had the entire property appraised and was confident that the sale proceeds would cover Jenna's entire college fees. I asked her if she had lost her mind because there was no way I would sell my property just for her daughter to attend a high-end university. I told her that this house meant something to me, and I wasn't going to part with it so easily. Undeterred, Susan suggested I could loan her the money and that Jenna would pay it back after graduation. While I understood the importance of a college education, I wasn't willing to accept her outrageous request. Her persistence made it clear that she was determined to fund her daughter's dreams, even if it meant making an outlandish proposition to a near stranger. I calmly explained to Susan that the property was a significant part of my livelihood and that I couldn't simply part with it. I concluded by telling her, "The burden of your daughter's tuition should not fall on my shoulders." I told Susan that if she couldn't afford to send her daughter to that university, she could ask her family members for help or consider finding a more affordable option. Despite my attempts to make her see reason, Susan continued to press the issue, insisting that I was the only one who could help. She claimed it wouldn't be a big deal for me to sell my property and hand her the money. Realizing this was going nowhere, I left the property after firmly asking Susan never to approach me about this matter again. I requested that she recognize how unreasonable her demand was and urged her to find another way to solve her problem. I thought she might eventually realize her mistake, but over the next few weeks, Susan didn't give up. As her daughter's college journey drew closer, the situation became increasingly unbearable. Susan, despite my clear refusal, kept pleading with me daily to sell my property as soon as possible and even stopped paying her rent in protest. Our once amicable relationship had soured entirely, and the tension between us grew as Susan became more insistent, convinced that my refusal was selfish and jeopardizing her daughter's future. Meanwhile, I was losing income due to her refusal to pay rent in protest. I warned her that I would take this to court since we had an ironclad agreement, but she remained defiant, and it became clear her demands had no end. The turning point came when Susan began involving others in our dispute. She started approaching her friends and neighbors, portraying me as an unsympathetic landlord who refused to help a young girl realize her dreams. She told them that, although I was very wealthy, I refused to loan her the money. Given her status as a single mother struggling to make ends meet, her story garnered sympathy from those she confided in. Susan took it a step further by airing her grievances on social media. She posted on Facebook, blaming me for her daughter's inability to attend college, which quickly circulated in our neighborhood. People began sympathizing with her plight, assuming I was indeed capable of helping but was choosing not to. It was a surreal experience, feeling like an outsider in my own community. With tension in the neighborhood mounting, my wife decided to reach out to Susan, hoping a direct conversation might resolve the conflict. However, Susan wasn't interested in a calm discussion. She launched into a tirade, accusing me of having the means to sell the property, which she saw as the only way to secure her daughter's future. Despite my wife's sincere attempts to reason with her, Susan's conviction remained unshaken. She repeatedly asserted that we had the means to fund her daughter's college education and were being selfish by refusing. Susan's social media post, painting me as an unsympathetic and wealthy landlord who refused to help, had a noticeable impact on our neighbors. Some who had previously been friendly began viewing us with skepticism, believing that I was indeed capable of alleviating her daughter's financial burdens but was choosing not to out of selfishness. Fortunately, others who knew the reality of my situation and the hard work I had invested shared my perspective. They were equally appalled by Susan's audacious demand and reminded me of the importance of protecting the legacy I had built. As the community became more divided, Susan continued to fan the flames, accusing me of lacking empathy and exploiting her by allowing her to live in my property rent-free. Her social media posts became more vocal, sharing exaggerated stories of her daughter's determination and the sacrifices she claimed to have made to prepare for college. The situation escalated from a private disagreement to a public spectacle. The weight of the allegations began affecting my family as well. My children started experiencing bullying at school, with classmates parroting the false claims they had seen on social media about me. Watching the distress this situation caused my family was heartbreaking, and I knew I had to act. I had hoped Susan would eventually stop, but now that my children were suffering, it was time to set the record straight and defend my integrity. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and landlord-tenant conflicts. Together, we drafted a cease and desist letter to end Susan's defamatory actions and protect my standing within the community. My lawyer explained that the letter was the first step in our legal battle, and if Susan didn't back down, we would pursue the matter in court. When Susan received the letter, she was understandably shocked. She attempted to reach out to me by phone, but I chose not to answer her calls. Instead, she sent me a text message, expressing her desire to talk and clear this up before things went too far. She claimed it was all a huge misunderstanding and suggested we could discuss it to resolve the issue. I replied, stating firmly that my intention was to take her to court if she continued her campaign against me. I told Susan to brace herself and enjoy it because she would soon regret ever trying to mess with me. I knew this was going to be an uphill fight. This woman had been relentless in insisting that I pay her daughter's tuition, damaging my family's reputation both in the community and online. My lawyer is preparing our case for trial if she refuses to back down, outlining all the false accusations and the harm she's caused us over the last few months. When some of my relatives heard I was taking her to court, they suggested giving her a chance to settle the matter amicably, citing that she's a single mother trying to do the best for her child. So, Reddit, am I the villain here for refusing to sell my property to pay this entitled mom's daughter's college fees and instead taking her to court? Susan responded to our legal action with a letter filled with threats and more defamatory claims. She accused me of charging high rent, knowing her financial struggles, which she claimed made it impossible for her to save for her daughter's education. I can't believe how low she's willing to go, stooping to outright lies to get her way. Her accusations are entirely baseless, and it's incredibly frustrating to see her play the victim when I had provided her with a subsidized rent all these years. It's clear she's trying to manipulate the situation in her favor, and I'm not about to let that happen. My lawyer, Brian, assured me that we have a strong case since her accusations are groundless, but he also warned me to be prepared for a long, draining legal process. I can't help but think about how quickly this situation spiraled. It was never my intention to end up in a courtroom with a tenant, but sometimes you have to stand your ground to protect what's rightfully yours. Susan might have her reasons, but I can't allow her to pressure me into selling my property. My family's future is at stake, and I'm determined to see this through, no matter how challenging it gets. The legal proceedings have begun, and the anticipation leading up to the court date was excruciating. The courtroom was charged with tension as both parties presented their arguments and evidence. Susan, flanked by her attorney, portrayed herself as a struggling mother determined to secure her daughter's future. Her attorney painted a vivid picture of her financial hardships, emphasizing how my property was supposedly her daughter's last hope for attending the prestigious out-of-state university. Susan's testimony was laced with emotion. Her eyes welled up with tears as she described the sacrifices she had made as a single mother, the long hours she worked, and her relentless pursuit of financial aid and scholarships. She painted herself as a mother who had left no stone unturned in her daughter's journey to success. Throughout the proceedings, Susan's attorney relentlessly tried to paint me as a wealthy, unsympathetic landlord who prioritized profit over a young girl's dreams. They implied that I had been fully aware of Susan's financial struggles yet continued to exploit her with high rent. But the most astonishing twist came when Susan introduced a witness, a family friend, who claimed to have overheard a conversation in which I allegedly promised to sell the property to finance her daughter's college education. I sat in disbelief as this blatant falsehood was presented. My attorney, Brian, vehemently challenged the claim, asserting that no such conversation ever took place. He took a methodical approach, cross-examining the so-called witness to highlight the gaps and inconsistencies in their story. Brian asked the friend to specify the date, time, and location of this alleged conversation, hoping to expose the inconsistencies or gaps in their recollection. The family friend struggled under scrutiny, unable to provide consistent details or any concrete evidence, such as texts or emails, to support their claim. Their testimony became increasingly shaky under cross-examination. To further undermine Susan's case, Brian presented records of texts and emails between Susan and me during the period when the alleged promise was said to have occurred. These messages clearly showed that the topic of selling my property to fund her daughter's education was never discussed. Instead, they revealed that Susan was the one persistently urging me to sell my property. Additionally, a neighbor who lived next to Susan's property testified that she had been paying significantly less rent than others in the area. My lawyer even brought in rent receipts from other tenants in the neighborhood to prove this point. Brian argued that the absence of any written or electronic communication regarding Susan's claims, combined with the neighbor's testimony, cast serious doubt on the family friend's account, making it inadmissible as concrete evidence. We then shifted our focus to Susan's actions on social media. Brian presented a comprehensive record of Susan's posts and messages, where she accused me of being an unsympathetic and heartless landlord who refused to support her daughter's dreams. These posts were filled with emotional appeals and outright falsehoods, clearly designed to gain sympathy and support from the community. We emphasized that these posts were intentionally crafted to create a narrative that painted Susan as a struggling mother doing everything possible for her child's future, when, in reality, she was emotionally blackmailing me to sell my property. Brian then introduced screenshots of social media comments and direct messages from individuals who had engaged with Susan's posts. Some of these individuals were part of the local community and had formed a negative opinion of me based on the false information presented by Susan. These comments ranged from expressions of sympathy for her plight to outright accusations that I was an unfeeling landlord exploiting her situation. In addition to the social media evidence, we presented witness testimonies from my children, who had experienced bullying at their school due to Susan's social media posts. They described how their classmates had echoed the false claims they had read online about their father, leading to name-calling and harassment. My attorney went on to argue that there was a direct connection between Susan's false accusations on social media and the bullying my children had endured. The intentionally misleading narrative she had crafted had not only damaged my reputation but also directly affected my family's well-being. This presentation of evidence effectively showed how Susan's actions on social media led to real-life consequences for my children. As the legal proceedings continue, I am confident that justice will be served. The evidence presented so far has shed light on the truth and exposed the false claims made against me. I believe that the court will see through the manipulation and ensure a fair outcome in this case. The past month has been a grueling experience due to the legal proceedings. It has been like a roller coaster ride, with unexpected twists and turns. My lawyer continued to present evidence and testimonies, which made it increasingly clear that Susan's claims were baseless. Her attempt to manipulate the situation by introducing a family friend who falsely testified about a promise I had never made fell apart under scrutiny. The lack of concrete evidence and inconsistencies in the witness's account cast doubt on the validity of their claims. After a thorough examination of all the evidence and testimonies, the judge finally announced the verdict and ruled in my favor. This came as a huge relief to me, and I was grateful that the judge had seen through all the baseless claims. Susan was found guilty of defamation and was ordered to pay damages for the harm she had caused to my reputation, starting with paying the rent for the previous months and additional fines. A restraining order was also issued by the judge, preventing Susan from making any further defamatory statements about me or my family. This ruling successfully validated my actions and my right to protect my property. As the legal battle concluded, I watched Susan sitting beside her lawyer, looking defeated. I turned to look at her daughter, Jenna, and couldn't shake off the thought that her dreams had been compromised by her mother's sense of entitlement. This nightmare was finally coming to an end, with justice being served. It was a lesson for everyone on the importance of defending oneself and not letting someone else's audacious demands shake our core beliefs. I can now move forward with a renewed sense of self-assurance and the knowledge that my house and our livelihood are secure. I would like to thank everyone who has supported me on this journey. The mental pressure and struggles my family and I went through were immense, but ultimately, the truth prevailed. It has been 6 months since my courtroom victory. The restraining order has effectively silenced Susan, and the damages she had to pay for defamation provided some level of consolation for the harm done to my reputation. Susan and her daughter had to move out after I gave them the eviction notice. While their circumstances remained challenging, I knew they were no longer my responsibility. I did feel a twinge of sympathy for her daughter's lost educational opportunities, but the reality was that her mother's audacious request had put their family in a difficult situation. Susan was also forced to take down her defamatory social media posts as part of the court's ruling, and everyone quickly found out the extent of her lies. The last I heard about them was when her daughter, Jenna, reached out to me with an apology out of nowhere. Jenna had always been a great kid, and I had watched her grow up, but when her mother started falsely alleging things about me, I cut off contact with them. I was surprised that she wanted to get in touch with me after her mother publicly lost the case. Her message was filled with genuine remorse for the way her mother had behaved and the consequences that had befallen her family as a result. She expressed gratitude for our patience and understanding during the ordeal, recognizing that her mother's actions had caused harm to both our families. She also shared that they had relocated to a more affordable area and that she had decided to attend a local college to pursue her education. She informed me that she had spoken with her mother after the legal proceedings ended and had asked her to back off. stating that she was determined to secure her own future without making any audacious demands. I felt sympathy for what she had to go through at such an early age because of her entitled mother's false claims. I told her that everyone deserves a second chance, and it was admirable that she was taking control of her own destiny. I wished her the best of luck with her studies and assured her that the past was behind us. Now that Susan and her daughter no longer live on my property, our life has settled into a new normal. The weight of the false accusations and the bullying our children faced earlier has been lifted. We took action by reaching out to our children's school and addressing the bullying they had gone through.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Title: Caught in the Act. The hilarious day my wife took over my guilty pleasure. It was a sunny Saturday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels possible. Birds were chirping outside, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Ethan stood in the kitchen, expertly balancing a tray with 2 plates of pancakes topped with strawberries and whipped cream. He had a plan. A breakfast-in-bed surprise for Lila, his wife. With a smug grin, he thought about how impressed she'd be. Lila, his ever-practical wife, often teased him for his romantic gestures, but secretly Ethan knew she loved them. He tiptoed up the stairs, careful not to make the old wooden steps creak. As he approached their bedroom, he heard something strange. It was faint at first, but as he got closer, the sound became clearer. Laughter. High-pitched, overly dramatic laughter, followed by gasps, cheers, and even a groan of frustration. Confused, Ethan paused. Was Lila on a call with one of her friends? He tilted his head, trying to make sense of the noise. And then he heard it, the unmistakable theme song of Ultimate Bake-Off Drama, blaring from their TV. His eyes widened in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Lila had always rolled her eyes at his love for reality TV shows, especially ones as over-the-top as Bake-Off Drama. She'd call them frivolous and predictable, insisting she preferred documentaries or heartfelt indie films. Ethan couldn't believe his ears. Balancing the tray with one hand, he slowly pushed the bedroom door open with the other. What he saw nearly made him drop the tray. There was Lila, sitting cross-legged in bed, still in her cozy flannel pajamas, completely absorbed in the screen. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she held a mug of tea in one hand while the other gestured wildly at the TV. "No, no, no, you're over-whipping the cream, it's going to split," she shouted at the screen, as though the contestants could hear her. Ethan's jaw dropped. Not only was Lila watching his favorite guilty pleasure show, but she was fully invested. "Lila!" Ethan exclaimed, stepping into the room. She froze, her eyes darting from the screen to him. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, with the guiltiest smile he'd ever seen, Lila said, "I can explain." But before she could say another word, they both burst into uncontrollable laughter. Ethan set the breakfast tray down on the bedside table and crossed his arms, his expression mock stern. "So, this is what you do when I'm not around? Secretly binge my favorite guilty pleasure?" he teased. Lila's cheeks flushed, but she couldn't wipe the grin off her face. Okay, you caught me," she admitted, raising her hands in surrender. "But in my defense, it's really addictive." Ethan plopped down on the bed beside her, still shaking his head in disbelief. "Addictive? This is the same show you've been making fun of me for years. You said it was trashy and predictable," he said, feigning outrage. Lila laughed, nudging him playfully. "I'm not proud of it, okay? But once I started watching, I just couldn't stop." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you start watching?" Lila's face turned even redder. "Fine," she sighed. "It was a couple of weeks ago. You fell asleep early after your work meeting and I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through the TV and I saw the first episode. I thought, I'll just watch a few minutes. But then, well, one episode turned into 4. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. 4 episodes? On the first night? Lila nodded sheepishly, and Ethan couldn't help but laugh. You're unbelievable. Lila shrugged. It's not my fault. The editing is so dramatic, and the contestants are so chaotic. Did you see that guy who tried to bake a 6-tier cake but used salt instead of sugar? I mean, come on, how could I not keep watching? Ethan's laughter grew louder. Oh, I remember him. He's a legend. The two of them spent the next few minutes recounting their favorite moments from the show, their voices overlapping in excitement. It was the first time Ethan had seen Lila this animated about something so light-hearted, and he found it utterly endearing. Lila leaned back against the pillows, her expression thoughtful. You know, she began, I always thought these kinds of shows were just silly fluff. But now I get why you love them. It's not just about the drama or the baking disasters. It's comforting, like a warm blanket after a long day. Ethan leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued. Comforting? That's not a word I'd expect you to use for a show you called ridiculous baking nonsense. Lila smirked, tossing a pillow at him. Don't rub it in. But seriously, there's something now therapeutic about it. Watching these people mess up, then get back up and create these incredible cakes or pastries. It's inspiring in a weird way. Ethan chuckled. See? That's the magic. It's like watching a soap opera, but with more sugar and less heartbreak. He paused, studying her face. But why the sudden change? You've never been the reality TV type. Lila hesitated, biting her lip. Well, I guess. I've been feeling kind of stressed lately. Work's been insane, and everything just feels so serious all the time. I needed something to take my mind off it, and your silly little show did the trick. Ethan's expression softened. Lila, you should have told me you were feeling that way. We could have figured something out together. She gave him a small, grateful smile. I know. I guess I didn't want to worry you. But hey, I'm here now, fully converted to the world of baking chaos. Ethan grinned, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You know what this means, right? You're officially a member of the Ultimate Bake Off Drama Fan Club. No turning back now. Oh no, Lila groaned, covering her face with her hands. What have I done? Ethan laughed, pulling her closer. Don't fight it. Embrace the chaos. For the rest of the day, Ethan and Lila stayed in bed, binge-watching the show together. The curtains stayed drawn, the tray of now cold pancakes sat untouched, and time seemed to melt away. They laughed at the contestants' over-the-top personalities, cheered for their favorites, and groaned at the inevitable baking disasters. Even Charlie, their golden retriever, got in on the action. He curled up at the foot of the bed, occasionally perking up his ears and barking whenever the contestants' arguments grew especially heated. Lila reached down to scratch his head. Even Charlie thinks this show is chaotic, she said with a laugh. At one point, Ethan turned to Lila with a mischievous glint in his eye. You know, we could totally do this. Lila raised an eyebrow. Do what? Join a baking competition. Why not? Ethan said, sitting up straighter. We'd make a great team. I'd handle the creative side, and you could supervise. Lila gasped in mock offense. Supervise? Wow, such faith in my baking skills. Ethan smirked. Hey, someone needs to keep me from accidentally using salt instead of sugar. She laughed, throwing a pillow at him. Fine, but only if I get to wear the chef's hat. Deal, Ethan said, pulling her into a hug. Team Bake Off is officially in business. As the credits rolled on the season finale, Lila let out a dramatic sigh. Well, Ethan, I guess this is our thing now. Ethan laughed, pulling her close. Finally, welcome to the dark side. Just then, Charlie, Ever the opportunist, knocked over the remote with his paw, accidentally starting a new season. The opening theme song blared through the room, and Ethan and Lila exchanged a look. For a moment, they both sat there, frozen. Then, as if on cue, they burst into laughter. "Well," Lila said, settling back against the pillows, "I guess one more episode won't hurt." "Or a whole season," Ethan added with a grin. And so their guilty pleasure adventures continued, with Charlie happily wagging his tail at the foot of the bed, ready for whatever baking chaos came next. And that, my friends, is how Lila and I discovered that even guilty pleasures can bring people closer. Let me know in the comments. What's your guilty pleasure, and have you ever caught someone enjoying it too? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more fun, relatable stories. Thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one.
Subscribe Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. The Detroit skyline loomed in the rearview mirror as Jake's battered pickup rumbled down the street. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white from the strain of a 14-hour shift. At 35, Jake's body felt older than his years, worn down by the relentless grind of construction work. As he pulled into the driveway of his modest home, Jake's eyes flickered to the empty spot where Sarah's car should be. A familiar pang of unease twisted in his gut. Things hadn't been right between them for months now. The house was quiet as Jake trudged through the front door, his work boots leaving dusty imprints on the worn linoleum. He made his way to the kitchen, drawn by the siren call of a cold beer. That's when he saw it, Sarah's phone on the counter. Its screen lit up with a notification. Jake froze, his hand halfway to the fridge handle. The notification was from a group chat labeled Girls Trip Group. His wife's recent emotional distance flashed through his mind, fueling a surge of suspicion. "This isn't right," Jake muttered, even as he reached for the phone. Guilt warred with a desperate need to know as he swiped open the message. His breath caught in his throat. There, illuminated by the harsh glow of the screen, was a photo that shattered his world. Sarah, her smile radiant, leaned into the frame, but it was a hand resting possessively on her lower back that sent ice through Jake's veins. He'd recognize that ring anywhere. It belonged to his brother, Mike. With trembling fingers, Jake navigated to Sarah's text messages. The most recent exchange with Mike burned itself into his brain. "Sarah, missing you. Mike, me too, darling. Can't stop thinking about our weekend in Chicago. Let's plan another getaway soon." Jake's too wrapped up in work to notice anything. The crunch of tires on gravel jolted Jake back to reality. Sarah was home. He quickly replaced the phone and retreated to the garage, his mind reeling from the betrayal. Jake grabbed a wrench and bent over his motorcycle, feigning work as he heard Sarah's key in the lock. His heart hammered in his chest, a toxic mix of rage and heartbreak threatening to overflow. "Jake!" Sarah's voice called out. "You home?" "In here," he managed to grunt, not trusting himself to say more. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering as she took in Jake's tense posture. "Everything okay?" Jake nodded tersely, keeping his eyes fixed on the bike's engine. "Long day. Gonna tinker for a bit before dinner." As Sarah's footsteps faded, Jake's grip on the wrench tightened until his knuckles turned white. His world had just imploded, and he had no idea what to do next. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, matching Jake's mood perfectly. He arrived at the construction site early, desperate for the distraction of physical labor. But as he maneuvered the crane into position, his mind kept drifting to Sarah and Mike. The betrayal ate at him, making it hard to focus. "Jake, watch it!" Tom's shout snapped Jake back to reality, just as the crane's load swung dangerously close to a group of workers. Jake's heart raced as he quickly corrected course, narrowly avoiding disaster. Tom stormed over, his face thunderous. "My office! Now!" The foreman barked. Jake followed Tom to the cramped trailer that served as the site office, bracing himself for the inevitable ash-chewing. To his surprise, Tom's expression softened as he closed the door behind them. "What's going on with you, Jake?" Tom asked, concern evident in his voice. "You've been one of my best guys for years. I've never seen you this distracted." Jake debating how much to reveal. "Just personal stuff. Won't happen again." Tom studied him for a moment. "Look, I don't need details, but if you need to take a day or two to sort things out, do it. Can't have you endangering yourself or the crew." Jake nodded, grateful for the unexpected understanding. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it, but I'd rather keep working, keep my mind off things." "All right." Tom relented. "But one more close call, and you're on mandatory leave." Got it. Jake agreed. As he left the trailer, Jake overheard a group of his co-workers huddled together, their voices low and concerned. Third site hit this month. One of them was saying, "Whoever's behind these break-ins knows their stuff." Jake slowed his pace, listening intently. "Gotta be an inside job." Vince, the site's elderly security guard, chimed in. "They're bypassing security systems like they built M themselves." The conversation shifted as Jake approached, but the seed of an idea had already taken root in his mind. If there was a way to get involved in these thefts, it could be his ticket out, a chance at revenge and financial security all in one. After his shift ended, Jake found himself in front of the Rusty Nail, a dive bar he hadn't visited in years. The neon sign flickered weakly in the twilight as Jake pushed open the grimy door. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes hit him like a wall. Jake scanned the dim interior until he spotted a familiar face hunched over the bar. "Daryl," Jake called out as he approached. The man's head snapped up, bloodshot eyes widening in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. Jake Buford, as I live and breathe. What brings you to this fine establishment?" Jake settled onto the cracked vinyl bar stool next to Daryl. "Just felt like a change of scenery," he said casually. "How have you been?" Daryl snorted. "Oh, staying busy." His eyes darted around the bar before he leaned in closer. "Word is you're still in construction. Bet you hear all sorts of interesting things." Jake's pulse quickened. This was the opening he'd been hoping for. He signaled the bartender for a beer before responding. "Funny you should mention that," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "There's been some talk about break-ins at job sites. High-end equipment getting lifted. Sounds like a pretty sophisticated operation." Daryl's eyebrows shot up. "That's so? Hypothetically speaking, of course. But a guy might be interested in more details about something like that, if he knew the right people to talk to." Jake took a long pull from his beer, weighing his next words carefully. Hypothetically, a guy might be looking to get involved in something like that, if the price was right. A slow grin spread across Daryl's face. "Well now, that's mighty interesting. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Why don't we step outside for a smoke and continue this fascinating hypothetical conversation?" As they exited into the alley behind the bar, Jake felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into dangerous territory, but the thought of Sarah and Mike's betrayal steeled his resolve. This was his chance to take control, to hit back at a world that had sucker-punched him. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake threw himself into gathering intelligence. Every spare moment was devoted to uncovering the depths of Sarah and Mike's betrayal, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for his own illicit activities. Jake volunteered for night shifts at various construction sites, using the time to study security systems and identify valuable equipment. His co-workers chalked up his sudden enthusiasm to trying to escape whatever was troubling him at home. They had no idea how right they were. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Jake found himself parked across the street from the Moonlight Motel, a seedy establishment on the outskirts of town. Like clockwork, Sarah's car would pull in at 7 p.m., followed shortly by Mike's flashy sports car. They always took room 212. The first time Jake saw them together, laughing as they hurried into the room, he nearly lost it. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly he thought it might snap. But as the rage subsided, a cold determination took its place. He would make them pay, but on his terms. One Tuesday afternoon, Jake found himself standing outside Mike's apartment, a set of lockpicks in his trembling hands. He'd learned the skill in his misspent youth, never imagining he'd need to use it against his own brother. The lock gave way with a soft click. Jake slipped inside, his heart pounding. He worked quickly, planting hidden cameras in strategic locations. As he searched for any additional evidence of Mike's betrayal, Jake stumbled upon a treasure trove of incriminating financial documents. Apparently, Mike's infidelity wasn't his only secret. Jake uncovered clear evidence of tax evasion and fraudulent business dealings. It was almost too perfect. Just as Jake finished photographing the damning paperwork, he heard voices in the hallway. Panic gripped him as he recognized Mike's laugh. Jake barely made it to the stairwell before the apartment door opened. Pressed against the wall, Jake held his breath as Mike passed by, Sarah's favorite flowers clutched in his hand. The sight reignited Jake's fury, cementing his resolve. There would be no mercy. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside him, Jake hunched over his laptop in the dim light of the basement. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he researched wilderness survival techniques and remote cabin rentals. A plan was taking shape in his mind, a way to exact his revenge while securing his own future. It was risky, potentially devastating if it went wrong. But as Jake glanced at the wedding photo on his desk, Sarah's smiling face now a mockery of their vows, he knew he had nothing left to lose. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, he would spring the trap. And when the dust settled, Jake would emerge victorious or go down in flames trying. Jake sat in the darkness of his basement, the glow of his laptop screen casting eerie shadows across his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as he prepared to set his plan in motion. With a deep breath, he clicked send on an anonymous tip to the IRS, detailing Mike's financial irregularities. "Let's see how you like being stabbed in the back, brother," Jake muttered, a smile twisting his features. Over the next few weeks, Jake's life became a carefully choreographed dance of deception. By day, he was the model employee, throwing himself into his work with renewed vigor. But as soon as darkness fell, he transformed into something else entirely. Using the knowledge gleaned from his night shifts, Jake orchestrated a series of small-scale thefts at various construction sites across Detroit. He moved like a ghost, bypassing security systems with ease and selecting only the most valuable, portable equipment. After each heist, Jake would meet Daryl in dimly lit parking lots or seedy bars to fence the stolen goods. The wads of cash he received in return felt like victory in his hands. "You're a natural at this, Jake," Daryl remarked one night, eyes glinting with admiration and a hint of wariness. "Just don't get too greedy, yeah?" Jake nodded, pocketing the money. "Don't worry. I know exactly what I'm doing." At home, Sarah's behavior shifted. She became increasingly distant, her eyes darting nervously whenever Jake entered the room. Her excuses to leave the house grew more frequent and paper-thin. "Book club again?" Jake asked one evening, his tone carefully neutral as Sarah grabbed her keys. "Yeah, we're discussing a really complex novel. Might run late," Sarah replied, unable to meet his gaze. As she hurried out the door, Jake allowed himself a small, bitter laugh. He played the role of the unsuspecting husband to perfection, all the while feeling the weight of his growing emergency fund hidden in the basement. Mike paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean an audit? There must be some mistake." The IRS agent on the other end remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, Mr. Buford, but we received information that requires a thorough investigation of your finances. All your accounts will be frozen until we complete our review." As Mike's world began to crumble around him, Sarah found herself increasingly alone. Her calls and texts went unanswered, their clandestine meetings abruptly canceled. Guilt and fear gnawed at her, driving her to seek comfort in the last place she expected, Jake's arms. "I'm sorry I've been so distant lately," Sarah whispered one night, curling up next to Jake on the couch. "Work's been crazy and I feel like we've lost our connection." Jake's arm tightened around her, his face a mask of concern and understanding. Inside, his heart raced with a mixture of triumph and disgust. "I've been feeling it too," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Maybe we need to get away for a bit. Just the two of us. Reconnect." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? That sounds wonderful. Where were you thinking?" Jake smiled, the trap snapping shut. "I found this great little cabin upstate. Totally secluded, beautiful scenery. Perfect for leaving all our problems behind for a weekend." As Sarah enthusiastically agreed, Jake felt a twinge of something: regret, sadness for what might have been. He pushed it aside, focusing on the next phase of his plan. At work, Jake's productivity soared. He channeled all his anger and pain into his job, impressing Tom and his fellow workers with his dedication. "I don't know what's got into you lately, Jake," Tom remarked one afternoon, clapping him on the shoulder. "But keep it up. I'm thinking you might be ready for more responsibility around here." Jake nodded, allowing himself a moment of genuine pride. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity." As Jake left Tom's office, he noticed a new face on the site. A sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, talking intently with Vince, the security guard. "That's Detective Carter," Vince informed him later, his voice low. "She's investigating all these break-ins. Interviewed half the crew already." Jake's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yeah? What'd she think happened?" Vince shrugged. "Not sure, but she's thorough. Been asking a lot about security protocols, work schedules, that sort of thing." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I hope they catch whoever's responsible. It's making everyone nervous." As he walked away, Jake's mind raced. He'd need to be extra careful now, with the police sniffing around. But he was too close to back out now. The cabin trip was only days away, and everything was falling into place. The night before the cabin trip, Jake's nerves were on edge. He'd volunteered for the late shift, telling Sarah he wanted to tie up loose ends before their getaway. In reality, he had one last, crucial task to complete. Under the cover of darkness, Jake moved swiftly through the construction site. His intimate knowledge of the security systems allowed him to disable them with ease. He worked methodically, gathering a significant haul of expensive equipment. But this time, instead of fencing the goods, Jake carefully planted evidence. A cigarette, but with Mike's preferred brand. A scrap of paper with numbers matching Mike's handwriting. A single strand of hair that could have come from either brother. As he finished, Jake took a moment to survey his handiwork. It was almost poetic, he thought, how perfectly everything was coming together. The next morning, Jake and Sarah set out for the cabin. The car ride was tense, filled with awkward small talk and long silences. As they wound their way up into the mountains, Sarah's phone began to buzz incessantly. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, feigning concern as Sarah's face grew increasingly pale. It's Mike," Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. "He says the IRS has frozen all his accounts, and now the police are investigating him for some kind of theft ring. Jake, I don't understand what's happening." Jake reached over, squeezing her hand. "Hey, it's all right. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Why don't we turn off our phones for the weekend? Give ourselves a chance to focus on us, like we planned." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, switching off her phone. Jake did the same, feeling a surge of anticipation. There was no turning back now. As they arrived at the cabin, Jake marveled at how peaceful it looked, the perfect setting for the storm he was about to unleash. They spent the afternoon settling in, taking a short hike and preparing dinner together. As night fell, Jake knew it was time. "Sarah," he said softly, setting down his wine glass, "there's something we need to talk about." The color drained from Sarah's face as Jake slowly, methodically laid out the evidence of her affair. Photos from the hidden cameras, printouts of text messages, hotel receipts, a damning trail of betrayal. Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face as she confessed everything. "I'm so sorry, Jake," she sobbed. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, you have to believe me. I love you, I do." Jake let the silence stretch, watching Sarah squirm. Finally, he spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. I think maybe we can work through this. It won't be easy, but if we both want it. Sarah's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Really? Oh, Jake, I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. Whatever it takes. Jake nodded, standing up. Let's take some time to process. How about I make us both a drink? Something to calm our nerves. As he walked to the kitchen, Jake allowed himself a small, victorious smile. From his pocket, he withdrew a small vial, a powerful sedative courtesy of Daryl's connections. With steady hands, he prepared 2 glasses, adding the colorless, odorless liquid to Sarah's. Returning to the living room, Jake handed Sarah her drink. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Sarah took a long sip, relief evident on her face. To new beginnings, she echoed. As they talked, Jake watched Sarah's eyes grow heavy, her speech slurring slightly. Within minutes, she was unconscious on the couch. Jake stood over her, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Part of him wanted to shake her awake, to scream and rage at her for destroying their life together. But a colder, more calculating part knew that this was just a beginning. He checked Sarah's pulse, ensuring the sedative hadn't been too strong. Satisfied, he began to move quickly, setting the final stages of his plan into motion. The first rays of dawn crept through the cabin windows as Jake stirred. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous night came rushing back. Sarah lay motionless on the couch, still under the influence of the powerful sedative. Jake moved quickly, gathering his things and erasing all traces of his presence. He paused at the door, looking back at Sarah's sleeping form. For a moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he squashed it ruthlessly. There was no going back now. The drive back to Detroit was a blur of adrenaline and anticipation. Jake's mind raced, going over every detail of his plan. He pulled into the construction site parking lot just as the early shift was arriving. Jake, thought you were on vacation, Tom called out, surprise evident in his voice. Jake feigned embarrassment. Yeah, about that. Sarah wasn't feeling well, so we came back early. Figured I might as well get some work done. Tom nodded sympathetically. Sorry to hear that. Well, we can always use the extra hands. As Jake immersed himself in work, he couldn't help but wonder what was unfolding back at the cabin. He imagined Sarah waking up, confused and alone. The thought brought a satisfaction. Miles away, Mike Buford was a man on the edge. His carefully constructed life was crumbling around him. The IRS audit had frozen his accounts, and now the police were sniffing around, asking pointed questions about construction site thefts. In a moment of desperation, Mike remembered Sarah mentioning a cabin getaway. It was a long shot, but he was out of options. He needed help, and Sarah was the only person he could turn to now. With shaking hands, Mike threw some clothes into a duffel bag and headed for his car. He'd have to use cash, avoid main roads. As he pulled out of his driveway, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving straight into a trap. Back at the cabin, Sarah's eyes fluttered open, her head pounded, and her mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. She sat up slowly, trying to piece together what had happened. Where was Jake? A noise outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch, then a familiar voice calling her name. Mike! Sarah croaked, stumbling to the door. What are you doing here? Where's Jake? Mike burst in, his eyes wild with panic. Sarah, thank God. We've got to get out of here. Something's gone terribly wrong. As Mike rambled about frozen accounts and police investigations, Sarah's fog began to clear. She remembered Jake confronting her about the affair, showing her evidence. But after that, nothing. Mike, stop, Sarah interrupted. Jake knows. About us. He had pictures, messages, everything. Mike's face drained of color. What? How? Oh, God. Sarah, I think we've been set up. As the reality of their situation sank in, Sarah and Mike looked at each other with growing horror. They'd walked right into an elaborate trap, and they had no idea how to escape it. Miles away, Jake slipped away from the job site, a burner phone clutched in his hand. With steady fingers, he dialed the police tip line. "I'd like to report a sighting of 2 fugitives," he said, disguising his voice. "At a cabin off Route 7. You'd better hurry." They looked ready to run. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to start her car. Nothing, not even a sputter. "It won't start," she called to Mike, panic rising in her voice. Mike slammed the hood of his own vehicle in frustration. "Mine's dead, too. He must have sabotaged them." The distant wail of police sirens sent a jolt of terror through them both. Without a word, they turned and ran for the dense forest surrounding the cabin. Branches whipped at their faces as they crashed through the underbrush. Sarah's fashionable boots, meant for city streets, not wilderness flight, threatened to betray her with every step. "We can't outrun them," Mike panted. "We need to find somewhere to hide." As the sounds of pursuit grew closer, Sarah and Mike pushed deeper into the unfamiliar terrain, desperation lending speed to their tired legs. Back in Detroit, Jake played his part to perfection. He paced the floor of the police station, the very picture of a concerned husband and brother. Detective Lynn Carter watched him with sharp eyes. "Mr. Buford, when was the last time you saw your wife?" "Yesterday morning. We were supposed to go to a cabin for the weekend, but I got called into work at the last minute. Sarah went ahead without me." He paused, letting his voice crack slightly. "I should have gone with her. If I had known." "And your brother?" Carter pressed. "When did you last have contact with him?" Jake's expression darkened convincingly. "Not for weeks. We had a falling out. I never imagined he'd be involved in something like this." As Jake spun his tale of betrayal and shock, he could see the sympathy in the eyes of the officers around him. Even the hard-nosed detective Carter seemed to be softening. "Mr. Buford," she said, her tone gentler now, "I know this is difficult, but we need to know about the cabin. Any information you can give us could be crucial." Jake hesitated, as if wrestling with his conscience. I don't want to believe Sarah's involved in Mike's crimes, but if there's any chance she's in danger or being held against her will." He took a deep breath. "I'll tell you everything I know." As Jake reluctantly provided details about the cabin's location, a flurry of activity erupted around him. Officers rushed to coordinate with state police, organizing a large-scale manhunt. Jake sank into a chair, accepting a sympathetic pat on the shoulder from a young officer. Inside, he felt a surge of triumph. Everything was going according to plan. In the forest, Sarah and Mike huddled beneath a rocky overhang, listening to the sounds of searchers in the distance. They were cold, hungry, and utterly lost. "How could we have been so stupid?" Sarah whispered, her voice bitter with self-recrimination. Mike said nothing, his eyes fixed on the treeline. They both knew there was no good answer to that question. 3 days. It felt like an eternity to Sarah and Mike as they stumbled through the wilderness, evading search parties and struggling to survive. The affair that had once seemed so exciting now lay in tatters, destroyed by the harsh reality of their situation. "This is all your fault," Sarah spat, her once perfect hair matted with leaves and dirt. "If you hadn't been so careless with your finances." "My fault." Mike shot back. "You're the one who couldn't keep your story straight." Jake must have suspected something for months. Their bitter argument was cut short by the distant sound of helicopter blades. They froze, exchanging a look of pure terror before scrambling for better cover. Meanwhile, back in Detroit, Jake was being hailed as a hero. His discovery of the construction site, theft ring, had impressed everyone from his co-workers to the police. "Jake, my office." Tom called out one morning. Jake entered, his face a careful mask of humility. "What's up, Tom?" The foreman grinned, holding out his hand. "Congratulations, Site Supervisor Buford. You've more than earned this." As Jake shook Tom's hand, accepting the promotion he'd long desired, he felt a twinge of something, Not quite regret, but a sense of the enormity of what he'd done. He pushed it aside. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? That night, Jake made one final move. Using another burner phone, he called in one last anonymous tip. "I saw 2 people matching the fugitive's description," he reported, his voice disguised. They were heading towards the old mine shaft off County Road 22. The police and rescue teams converged on the abandoned mine, believing they had Sarah and Mike cornered at last. Deep in the mine's twisting tunnels, Sarah and Mike heard the approaching sirens. The realization that they were trapped hit them like a physical blow. "There has to be another way out," Mike said desperately, pushing deeper into the darkness. Sarah hesitated, fear and exhaustion warring within her. "Mike, wait!" But it was too late. Mike's frantic scramble triggered a cascade of loose rock. Sarah screamed as the tunnel mouth collapsed, debris raining down around them. When the dust settled, Sarah found herself pinned beneath a fallen beam, pain shooting through her leg. Mike was nowhere to be seen. The rescue team found her quickly, drawn by her cries for help. As they worked to free her, Sarah's mind raced. How had it all gone so wrong? Hours later, Sarah lay in a hospital bed, an IV drip in her arm, treating her for dehydration and minor injuries. Detective Carter stood at the foot of the bed, her expression stern. "Mrs. Buford, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Carter said. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her. Slowly, haltingly, she began to confess everything. Jake arrived at the hospital, playing the part of the concerned husband perfectly. But as he approached Sarah's room, he heard her voice, thick with tears, spilling every secret. He stepped back, unseen, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. It was done. Over. He'd won, hadn't he? The following weeks passed in a blur. Sarah, granted immunity for her testimony, watched as her life fell apart. Friends and family turned their backs on her, disgusted by her betrayal. Jake filed for divorce, citing infidelity. The proceedings were quick, given Sarah's public admission of guilt. Mike's trial became a media sensation. Jake sat in the courtroom, watching as his brother's long history of fraud and the elaborate construction site, theft ring, were laid bare for all to see. 6 months later, Jake stood outside the courthouse, watching as Mike was led away to begin his 15-year sentence. He felt empty. The revenge he'd so meticulously planned had left him hollow. As he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with Detective Carter. "Mr. Buford," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Those anonymous tips were awfully convenient, weren't they?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "I suppose the tipster was just observant. Lucky for everyone involved." Carter studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "Lucky indeed," she said finally. "Take care, Mr. Buford." As Jake walked away, he could feel the weight of Carter's suspicions on his back. But he'd covered his tracks well. There was nothing to connect him to the elaborate scheme he'd orchestrated. He'd achieved his revenge without legal consequences. But as Jake stepped into his new apartment, he realized the cost had been higher than he'd ever imagined. His marriage, his brother, and perhaps a part of himself, all sacrificed on the altar of vengeance. Jake looked at himself in the mirror, site supervisor badge glinting on his chest. He was determined to rebuild his life, to make something of this second chance. But as he stared at his reflection, he knew he'd been forever changed by the choices he'd made. The man who looked back at him was a stranger, harder, colder, and carrying the weight of secrets that would never see the light of day. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.